Seriah's mechanism. You're listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, to a Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed, high atop the Edwards Plateau in Texas. And I think we got an excellent show for you guys tonight. I think the Watcher is going to join us. He's not here yet, I think. But he's somewhere out there, deep beneath his secret space station in secret outer space, and he is going to be joining us for this show. At least he's promised that. I'm not too sure. What do you think?
You never know.
Yeah, you never know with this guy. But tonight we are joined. Our guest tonight is Seriah from the very popular podcast, Where Did the Road Go? And we've been talking back and forth with him. You guys know that we've been on his show several times recently, many times. We go on and talk to Seriah a lot. It's great. But we're having him on here specifically to have a discussion, at least at the beginning, about a mechanism that he has come up with that he keeps threatening to write a book about. And we've talked about it a little bit off air, but now we're going to do a whole show about it. And so, Seriah, thanks so much for coming on the show, and welcome to the podcast.
Absolutely. But I think the actual mechanism's better left for near the end of the show, because we can talk about all the stuff that leads up to it, which people may not understand, right off the bat.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Yeah, so we did our homework as much as we could, and we've talked to you, of course, about it off air. So I'm ready to get into it. Where do you think we should start?
Well, first of all, did you say secret space station and secret outer space?
That's right. Deep beneath.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. He is deep beneath his secret space station in secret outer space. That's right.
I don't think I've ever caught that before.
Yeah. The Watcher's location is incredibly secret, except we all know that it's in a secret place in space. So, yeah.
Okay. All right.
In a bunker, deep beneath
Secret
his
space.
Yeah, that's right.
secret space.
That's right.
Well, so you guys last time we talked had told me to check out the shows you did with Marty.
Yes.
And this was the first thing I wanted to bring up, because I may have a something very interesting that came from those shows. Normally, honestly, I'm so inundated with UFO stuff most of the time, where it used to be if I saw, this show's on UFOs, I mean, it's one of my favorite subjects, I'd be like, ooh, I got to listen to that one. And now it's like, another show on UFOs. But you guys are like, no, Marty's great, you should listen to the show. So I did. I listened to all 3 parts, and you're right, Marty's great.
Yeah.
He really knows his stuff. He's although I was familiar with a lot of it, he did bring up some cases I hadn't heard of before, which is always cool. And he just seems like a really good guy.
Yeah.
And he had said something in either the end of part 1 or sometime in part 2, and it just set a trigger off. So he was talking about taking a photograph of some military craft that was doing a jump skip maneuver. Do you remember this?
I think so. Keep
And he
going.
was saying he was saying he was trying to take a picture of it,
Oh, yeah.
because he saw them doing the exercise, and his camera wouldn't focus on it. And then
That's
he
right.
said, well, of course it won't, because it's radar, invisible, and it's bathed in infrared light.
That's
And
right.
that
That's right.
immediately brings me to something John Keel said, which was in the 8th Tower. He points out that all of these phenomena seem to move in from the infrared spectrum. So maybe the reason we can't take clear pictures of this stuff is because they are bathed in either infrared light or a form of light that our cameras just can't handle.
Yeah, that is interesting. And yeah, the idea that somehow Kyle's talked about this quite a bit, that like the equipment that we use to see this stuff, as far as we know, is our eyes. If you hear it, you're using your ears, but really your brain is doing all this processing.
Yes.
And we try to make cameras and microphones and things like that to copy those tools that we have built into ourselves, but they don't quite, they can't quite get it. You know how it is. You go somewhere, like, for a really good example of this is you go to some landscape and it's just vast and beautiful, and you take photos of it and they just don't they just can't quite.
They can't capture it.
That's right. Yeah, they capture. I mean, the visuals are all there, but there's something more about being there that makes it more real to you. That makes you able to grasp it. I've had this example. Just I got a GoPro, and I'm like, okay, I'm about to go down this really steep hill on this ATV, and as I hook the GoPro up, and I start recording, and I dive down the hill on the ATV and drive. And when you watch the video, you can't tell that you're going down a really steep. You don't get the effect. Well,
you don't have as wide of a visual spectrum with the camera.
Yep.
And also, you don't have all the other senses that you're also picking information up with.
Exactly. So yeah, I wonder if there's. I mean, it just seems like there's something that's a part of this phenomenon that requires the human senses to really get a hold of it.
Oh well, yeah, definitely. But I think it's also existing in a possibly a light spectrum we don't normally have access to. And, we know about infrared, we know about ultraviolet, but who knows what else we don't know about. Those are the things we can't see we've been able to discover so far.
Yeah.
But if Keel is right and this stuff is coming in from the infrared range, then we would technically expect blurry pictures.
Yep.
And the other thing about these frequency ranges or spectra that our bodies can't perceive, we can build instruments to pick them up, but the only way that we can actually put them into context is to move what their frequencies are naturally into frequencies that we recognize.
Right.
So you'll never know what infrared light would look like after your brain processed it, because it doesn't.
Yeah.
You can detect it with an instrument, and you can visualize it on a screen that puts it in a frequency range that your brain does recognize.
Yeah.
But that doesn't actually tell you really what it's like.
Well, the other thing with UFOs is that it's not uncommon for people in monster sightings, UFOs, for people to have get things that are similar to conjunctivitis afterwards.
Huh.
And again, that hints at a form of light that we're not seeing, because monsters are generally, sometimes they have glowing red eyes, but they're not visibly giving off light that should be causing that type of stuff.
Yeah. I did not know about the conjunctivitis. That's
yeah.
I'd never heard that. Wow.
It's more common in UFOs, but it has been noted in monster sightings as well. Again, this is one of the things Keel talks about in various books and stuff, different cases where this has happened.
Wow. Yeah, so I wonder about cameras not being able to capture these things well. It does seem like that it's not just about light, maybe, that it's also that they're liminal themselves, right? That they're kind of almost in a way not completely there.
Right, yeah. Well, there's so there's a couple other things about the infrared that's interesting. Andrew Collins, one of his first books was called Alien Energy. And he shows people who there was some guy who could take infrared photos, and he would find UFOs in spots where people saw UFOs, but like a day earlier or something, and you'd see this UFO-like craft, or in the infrared photos. So there's as well as like over crop circles and other things like that, and that it would only show up in the infrared. And there's a video somewhere, and this is driving me crazy because I cannot find it. I'm pretty sure it was on the show UFO Hunters at one point. I've scanned through all the shows I could find of theirs. There's only one I couldn't find, which is probably where it is. But it was a police helicopter. The police helicopter was going along, and it was filming with infrared out the back of the helicopter. And they were watching this spinning craft follow them. And the cops are going, like there's nothing there. We can't see anything with our normal eyes. And then they're showing the infrared to the camera. And you can see this thing, and they change directions, and it kind of swings around and continues following. So there was something there that the infrared camera was picking up that they couldn't see with the naked eye.
Like it was making a heat signature, but it was invisible.
Yeah. or it was giving off some level of infrared light.
Yeah. So I mean, I associate infrared light with a heat signature. That's it's a low end spectrum. So like you use infrared and you can see animals at night because it
Right.
shows you their body heat.
Mm-hmm. Right, but I mean, is it because a thing that is hot generates? It's the generator of the light, right?
Yeah.
But there are probably other ways to generate it.
Probably, yeah. It's just that's the spectrum. It's
Right.
low frequency and heat.
It's atoms, and you're banging them together.
That's right. A low frequency light made by temperature. But yeah, there's like the upper infrared, like a lot of like security cameras now, and even handheld cams that say that they have infrared. They don't look at the lower end of the spectrum that actually sees like body heat, for example.
Right.
They're using the upper end of infrared that allows you to see in the dark in a sort of a black and white kind of way through the camera.
Yeah.
But it doesn't show you like bright white if something is hot.
Right.
Yeah.
The other really mind-bending thing about these other frequencies of light is that they also interact with materials differently than the visuals, than the visible spectrum.
Yeah.
Like glass, perfectly transparent glass is a mirror to infrared light.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's really strange. And then, there are other materials that it can pass through. It's because of that frequency range, the wavelength of this light, it can pass through things that visible light can't. It's reflected off of things that it absorbs visible light, or that visible light can pass through. So there's a completely different set of interactions that it's really hard to wrap your brain around when you're dealing with it. Like we have an infrared scope that we used at work a lot, and it's really strange walking around at night looking through that thing.
Yeah.
What types of things are, what brightness they are, or you go up to a glass window and you see yourself standing there with the infrared scope in your hand.
Yeah.
It's just weird.
Yeah. It's weird. A regular window will act like a mirror.
Yes.
But the lens on the end of the scope, when you look at it in regular light, is pitch black. It's because the lens on the end of the scope has to use a different kind of material, but it has to act like a lens as well. So it does have a glassy type lens in there. I can't remember the name of the material. It starts with a G, right?
I don't know.
But yeah, when you look at it in regular light, it looks black. It looks like a piece of obsidian, but the infrared passes right through it.
So there's a case that's usually known as like the Seattle Demon House, or Demons in Seattle, I think is what Ghost Adventures called it. It's a guy named Keith Linder, who I've had on the show, and he had activity in his house that was just off the scales. And there was a couple of really interesting things that came of it. And one of the things, Steve, is his last name Meir? I think that's he wrote the book on it with Jenny Ashford. But he's a parapsychologist out of the UK, part of one of the big groups over there. And he was telling me how he had EVPs from when they first got there. They were just setting up. They were recording themselves taking out the cameras and stuff. And there are all these voices talking, and there's nobody there. And he actually sent it to an audio expert, and the audio expert said, so I can't hear the EVPs. There's too many people talking. And Steve's like, nope, those are the EVPs. There was just like me and this one other guy, and that was it. Man. So at one point they turn on an infrared camera, and you hear this voice say, "We don't like that. Turn it off." And I'm like, I don't know how much to put into that because it's just an EVP, but that's kind of interesting, especially if they're coming from the infrared. Maybe it, affects them in some way.
Yeah, and it depends again on the type of infrared camera. A lot of the higher end infrared cameras actually output a beam. Like when you look at them, you see that they've got a bunch of little LEDs around them.
Right.
And
right.
like when you turn it on, those LEDs they glow very dim red in visible light. But in upper infrared, that's actually a really bright spotlight, which is what allows the camera to sort of light things up. And
so maybe if you exist in more of an infrared realm and someone hits you with a beam of infrared, it's blinding or painful.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to say it would be a blinding light in the infrared spectrum.
So that I find interesting. And when we talk about these things being liminal, when Josh wrote his book on smells, and he said, basically came down to sulfur being the most common smell in all of this stuff, which of course leads some people to just be like, well, it's demonic. Of course it's sulfur, but sulfur is the smell of decay. And so if these things are like, as we're going to get into, if we're somewhat creating these things through our own energy, it's very limited. So they may exist for only a short period of time, but if they can pull through enough energy to exist into our realm, into our light spectrum, they may immediately start decaying, creating that sulfur smell.
Yeah, that is an interesting idea. I mean, it's what creates what's decaying? That would be the next question that I would ask.
Right. Well, whatever form they've created, we don't know what it's made out of, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, they seem to be very physical to some degree, but then also not.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, that's the sulfur smell is you're right. It's made by something decaying, but that would be like an organic material, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So if you see a Bigfoot, and I mean, sure, you can say Bigfoot is an ape in the woods, and it smells like that because it's an ape in the woods, which does, is not wrong. But it also might be that it is a temporary form that's made, out of organic material that it somehow pulled together. Oh, yeah. And it's just immediately decaying, and it's only going to last, 20 minutes or an hour or whatever before it's completely gone again. And it does tend to point to these things being more light than anything else.
Yeah.
And I do believe people were using, I think it was in Taiwan or something I saw, they were wearing hats with infrared lights up on the brim pointing down over their faces so that the cameras couldn't see their faces.
I have a hard time thinking or I guess accepting the idea that they're somehow coalescing all this physical matter into a dense object that then quickly decays. Like where, that doesn't, I guess what I'm suggesting is, I think what seems to be more likely to me is that this is non-physical activity that may be, I don't know how to.
Well, but you are getting a smell, and a non-physical thing shouldn't be emitting smell.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of like once you coalesce all that mass, how does it dissipate? Well,
it's a good question. I mean, this is just a thought. I mean, that's almost a thought exercise with me.
But yes, the question is, if you're getting a smell and you're seeing something, there must be some physical reaction. This is what I always go back to. There has to be some kind of physical reaction, and if it's some kind of spiritual encounter, well, over and over again, these spiritual encounters exhibit physical things like light, smell, audio, sound waves. So they are interacting with the physical world in some way.
And they leave physical traces sometimes.
Yes, this is why it's such a conundrum.
Yeah.
Well, I think some of that comes down to the fact that we simply don't understand how reality works. We understand the most basic level of it, and that's about it.
Yeah, we understand our level, whatever that is. Yeah.
The most common level of easily testable things. Like the thing with the infrared light is it seems like there should be a way to test that hypothesis. Like I'm not sure exactly. I haven't quite come up with a way of doing it, but it seems like if this stuff is coming from the infrared, and that's why it's screwing with cameras, like, can we replicate that? Like have something move in from the infrared and see if it replicates what we get when we try to take pictures of these things?
Yeah, and the other thing I was just thinking of is like if you wanted to go, like for example, with that helicopter story you were telling, with the police not being able to see the object, but the infrared cameras picking something up. I would say that the like just from a purely materialist standpoint, the answer to that would be that there was something there making a heat signature that was invisible to visible light, right?
Right.
So the
Transparent, yeah.
Yeah, it was transparent to visible light, or it somehow was cloaking itself. And yet it was actually there because there was a heat signature that in an infrared camera had a definite shape, had a structure to it.
Right.
And that could be the case as well. I mean, so basically on that end, you would say, all right, so that's the possibility if we're looking at a purely technological object. But I think the same, you could basically try to test that in the same way if it's not purely a technological object, but some kind of manifestation, that there's an interaction happening with the physical realm that we know of, and that interaction, whatever it's doing, is in some way generating heat. So even if the object itself, or whatever it is that's happening back there, is invisible or transparent to visible light, and thus to the humans, and yet it's generating a heat signature that has structure, I think you could probably test those two things in the same way. Basically, you would need to look for something that can generate a signature without having a visible object there. And
right.
there are ways to do that, I guess, energy-based ways.
Lasers.
Yep.
And I mean, with that too, I mean, you could be looking at technology, human technology that we just, some kind of military drone they were testing out to see if the police would pick it up. Who knows?
Yeah.
But the point is, there was nothing there, but they were picking something up in the infrared.
Yeah.
So I think at least part of the answer to what we're trying to figure out here relies on exactly what Keel said back in the 70s, that the infrared spectrum is important to these things in some way. Like it's where they come into our reality from, whether they're always there and we just can't see them. And sometimes they can make that transition into our visible, experiential reality, or whether they're coming from someplace completely other, but that's where it enters in.
Do you know why he said that? Like, what was the context?
It was just his observations that these things usually, come in that, like, I think it's the purple sort of color that you get, like, that's closest to infrared.
Be a dark red, basically.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's. I mean, it's just an interesting observation, and I wonder. I mean, in the 70s, I guess there was infrared equipment, but it was probably military. I don't know.
Yeah.
Was there any like civilian available infrared equipment that he got his hands on that made him think this?
No, it was just him seeing UFOs and reading reports and stuff like that. I mean, that's basically what the Eighth Tower is about. Him looking at these other, like the super spectrum is what he calls it.
Okay.
And how these things are moving from outside of visible light, outside of visible sound, etc., and then making themselves known to us by some means.
Yeah, and I guess he would specifically be speaking about UFOs in that case, because a lot of times, like poltergeist or ghost experiences are associated with cold, which is, I mean, you can still say, you can involve that with the infrared spectrum, because a lack of heat will make a dark spot in an infrared camera, like a deep infrared camera. But it's actually generating a lot less infrared light than normal room temperature objects.
Right. And most of these things, I think, do show up dark. I know the pictures that Andrew Collins was talking about, most of those were dark blobs on the photographs.
Yeah. If it shows up dark in the infrared, then it's cold.
Interesting.
Yeah. Which would put it, so I wonder what the police were seeing in, that object. Were they seeing something bright? Because that would imply that it was hot if they're looking at it in the infrared.
Yeah, and see, it's that aired back in like 2011. So, I looked online. I found, like I said, all but one episode. I just kind of scanned through them because I wasn't going to watch them all the way through because I thought it was at the end. But it's been so long, it could have been a different show.
Yeah.
I could be remembering it wrong. So I want to find it so I can like rewatch it and be like, okay, this is what it was. Here's where they aired it. But I haven't been able to find it yet. If anyone knows where that is, by the way, let me know.
Yeah. Yeah, people should let them know. And I think I remember hearing about this too. When you were talking about it, it was ringing a bell. But I might have heard about it on your show, so who knows? It's
possible. I mentioned it before. It was one of the most fascinating things that show showed, I think, because I wasn't really that impressed with it. I mean, a UFO reality show is kind of a hard sell,
Yeah.
Like at least with ghosts, you can go out and maybe get some activity, but you can't, unless you're Stephen Greer, you're not going out and summoning UFOs.
That's right. Yeah, and so back to the infrared and the idea that they come from that. I mean, any interaction that either that changes temperature is messing with the infrared spectrum. So yeah, I guess that would be a proper thing to say, because a lot of these experiences are associated with either extreme heat or extreme colds.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
and in that sense, like just strictly like the physics of it, or if something's, I guess if it's cold, it's it's able to absorb heat, energy, right? And if it's hot,
maybe that's how it moves into the visible spectrum.
It's in other words, it's absorbing all these vibrations coming from all around it. And if it's hot, it's actually causing vibration to happen into the objects around it.
Yeah.
And so those vibrations emanate from a warm object or a hot object as infrared light, but also it'll get other things moving until they start generating infrared light. And a cold object will absorb infrared light from surrounding objects and actually, absorb some of their heat energy until they stop producing infrared light. You put a bunch of ice. If you watched through an infrared scope, you had a hot cup of coffee, and then you dumped a whole bunch of ice in there, the light would go away.
Yeah, over time. Yeah.
Over time, when that coffee got cold, it would stop generating all that infrared, and that's just because of the exchange of motion from all of the excited atoms in the hot cup of coffee. Their vibrations are being absorbed by the very still atoms in the water ice.
Yeah, and it is interesting because we do have a sensory ability to detect infrared light.
Yeah,
just touch.
It's on the skin.
Yeah, your skin can feel something that's hot, and that's you detecting infrared light. You just have to kind of be close.
And again, UFOs cause burns.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, it's it seems like something that should in some way be replicable.
Yeah,
words are hard sometimes.
Sometimes words are hard. Yeah.
So
so I would say that to me just to break it down to the simplest idea is that whatever manifestation is happening excites the atoms of matter in that area. Right.
Yeah.
So if it's just air, but suddenly all of those atoms and molecules of air start jiggling around because they're being pushed around by whatever this thing is, then they're going to get hotter.
Yep.
They're going to start bouncing off of each other more rapidly and thus producing an infrared light signature.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it was just he mentioned that one thing about taking the photo of the craft and why it wouldn't focus the camera. And I went, huh.
Yeah.
What was it Gil said,
Yeah. Well, I think we should all be grateful that if they are coming from the infrared spectrum rather than them coming from like the, extreme ultraviolet or gamma spectrum, which would be deadly. So
yeah, potentially.
Yeah.
But you also have those encounters, you got some of those out of South America and stuff where people have seen them, and they like the one guy whose skin apparently just melted right off of him.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
now
know, and-
that could also be just really strong heat, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It could be it could have been something worse, something higher spectrum.
So I mean,
so
there could be a lot of different stuff going on, and we're just kind of grouping it all together because it's all anomalous.
Yeah. And it's I don't know, when you think about any kind of power source, it's dangerous no matter what it is, you know.
Sure.
I mean, just if you just think of like the smallest, like a campfire, you don't want to get close to it. I mean, you do want to get close if it's really cold, but not too close, right?
Right.
It's
right.
it. No matter what it is, if it's generating energy, and that energy, you're using that energy to do work. Like in the case of a campfire, the work is to cook your breakfast or to keep you warm or whatever. The work is useful, but the source of the power is dangerous. And and when you're talking about craft like these, if they are technological, they're going to be filled with dangerous power. So the question is are they actual craft? Are they something in between? You know, I've started to think that they're kind of both, that they're both technological and also, I don't know what the word would be, spiritual, that they encompass both of these things.
Well, I think the problem is with them being technological is that they're all different.
Yeah.
You know, we get a few of the same thing, and that makes me think that our brains are creating a picture for something we can't comprehend. It's like, oh, there's that energy that I don't know what is, and I can't put we'll just put this face on it.
Yeah. Yeah, that there's a co-creative aspect. Is that what you mean? Or in this case, you're just saying that our brains are just...
Or just filling in the blank because it doesn't know what to do with it.
Okay.
Like, you know, there are all these one-off monster sightings, for instance, where no one else ever sees the same monster. Like Bigfoot's a common one, but there's lots of them where it's like, oh, someone saw this weird thing. It seems like a completely viable report. The person's trustworthy, et cetera, et cetera. So what if what really happened is they came across a form of energy their senses has never encountered before? You know, maybe it's something just bleeding a little bit in from the infrared. Well, your brain's gotta put a face on that. It has to translate it for you in some way.
Mm.
And, you know, for the unknown, your brain might just go, I don't know, monster, go the other way.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, the other way to look at it too is that this is on purpose, whatever it is, whether it's, you know, nuts and bolts technological or something else, something even purely spiritual or just pure energy or some part of the world, some part of the universe, the realm, the reality that we don't understand. It may be purposeful. It does seem to have agency, right? I think that I would say that. And so the question is are all these strange things that happen to people when they encounter these kinds of things, is that on purpose, or is that just purely a result of the interaction, or is the entity, whatever it is, making it strange? You know, I think that's an important question.
I think all of those things are actually true.
Okay. All of the above.
And I would also say that we make it strange because we can't comprehend it directly.
Yeah.
There is a book that I absolutely have been highly recommending everyone read, and I have yet to meet anyone else who's read it, called The Invisible Gorilla. Okay. And it's a psychological book, and it's based years ago. This experiment they did went viral.
Oh yeah.
Where, you know what I'm talking about with the gorilla and basketball players?
Yeah, where they tell you count on how many times the ball gets passed, and then the guy in the gorilla suit walks by in the background, and about 50% of the people who did the test never noticed the gorilla.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, the stuff in that, but the book, I mean, it goes way more in depth. It goes into how we form memories. It goes into the accuracy of our perceptions and what affects it. It's utterly fascinating, and it makes you just really look at the world differently because you realize how little of the world you're actually factually seeing. Like most of it is interpretation. And a good portion of that interpretation is also emotional.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it is as soon as something happens, now it's a memory, and those memories are very easily changed because you'll say, well, that didn't actually happen because that doesn't make sense. It must have been this.
Yeah. It's hard for me to understand. I mean, like, I don't know, weird stuff happens and I mean, do people really change their memories on that? Like, does that really happen? I guess like it's tough to say. How would you know if it happened to you? Because you wouldn't have no realization that it did, right? I guess is the idea.
Well, okay. So one of the things that people researching weird stuff have found is that people are less likely to believe their own experiences the further away they get from them. So like the longer ago it happened, the more easy it is for you to say, well, maybe I didn't see that, Let me see. There was a quote I made. I'm going to try and get these guys on Where Did the Road Go who wrote this, but I don't know if they'll do it because this is not a book on the paranormal. They're psychology professors.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they'll come on a show like Where Did the Road Go? Even if we're not talking paranormal stuff, they may not, they may feel like they don't want to be associated with it.
Right.
But I haven't asked them. If not, I may do something like what you've done with different books and just, quote it and look at it with a couple of other co-hosts.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. Oh, I just bought it, so I'm going to read it.
It's where is it? Okay. So it says the vividness of our recollections is tied to how they affect us emotionally. Beware of memories accompanied by strong emotions and vivid details because they are just as likely to be wrong as mundane memories, but you are far less likely to realize it.
Because you're attached. There's an emotional connection to them.
Right. So what they did there is they had video of stuff that was happening in classrooms when 9/11 happened. And they were still in touch with some of the people who were there that day. And they asked the people, what was going on when you heard about 9/11? And every single one of them told them exactly what they remembered happening. They insisted this is what happened. The memory is as vivid as yesterday because it was such a traumatic event. And every single one of them was wrong.
Huh.
Like some were more right than others, but none of them actually described the events of that day 100%.
Wow. Like they constructed memories afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I've heard of that too,
Well,
where there's a phenomenon where the more often you dwell on some memory, the more likely it is that you will change it, and not even on purpose. Yeah.
Right. Right. And, I mean, there are lots of people who, if you'll talk to them and they mention 9/11, they'll say, yeah, I remember seeing the first plane hit the building. And it's like, no, you didn't.
Yeah. Not on TV. You didn't. Yeah. Not unless you were in New York.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But they remember seeing it and they'll hold that. They'll be like, no, I remember seeing it and being shocked. And it's like that. No, It wasn't the first. We didn't know it was going to happen.
Right.
Well, the general public, at least, someone probably knew along the line, but that's a whole different thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually have at this point seen video of the first plane hit because I went and looked because people were some. Yeah. But yeah, on the day of, it was the news coverage didn't have it. So.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even President Bush said something about seeing the first plane hit, and everyone jumped on him. Oh, he's a liar and all this other stuff. And it's like, he legit might just be remembering wrong.
Right. So many people have.
Yeah. So I mean, and that's one of the cases they cover in The Invisible Gorilla is that of a police officer, and it was like in Boston or something like that, and they were chasing after a black suspect. And a black police officer in plain clothes joined them and got mistaken for the person they were chasing. So this police officer was actually still had his eye on the original subject. Meanwhile, the other police officers in his group had grabbed this police officer, not realizing it was, another police officer, and were literally beating him on the ground.
Man.
And he ran right by them. And so, in the trial about all this, they're saying, well, did you see this happen? And he's like, no. And they're like, but you were right there. You ran right by it. He's like, I realized that. I didn't see it. And, people are like, well, he's lying. He's just protecting his, he took lie detector tests. And he did all this other stuff. And he's like, if I saw it, I'd tell you, I don't know why I didn't see it,
Yeah, he was hyper-focused.
It's the illusion that we see everything that's going on. And again, with that invisible gorilla, you're counting the passes of the basketball, so you don't see the very obvious guy in the gorilla suit.
Yeah, and that was to the point to where when they showed the video back to the people who didn't see it, they were like, well, that's a different video. That guy wasn't there. Yeah.
Yep, they wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of experiments they did just like that, just showing you this illusion of attention that we literally just do not pay attention to most stuff.
Right.
And our brain just constructs like sort of like a backdrop around us. It's what we expect to be there.
Yeah, so I mean that calls into question all of the accounts of seeing lights and infrared signatures and all of this stuff.
Well, it calls into account everything anyone's ever remembered.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess for me, I would think that I kind of look at just going back to the light spectra. It's all I kind of think of it as one big spectrum, right? The electromagnetic spectrum. And it's all dependent on what's happening, which causes what types of waves or what wavelengths to take place. So, I mean, you got visible light in there. So people see orbs and stuff. There's infrared. People feel heat. They get burned. That could be microwave. There's radio anomalies, right? You're a radio guy. That's lower than microwave. So it's like, maybe really this stuff is just in whatever way it's interacting with the world. It's interacting possibly on all the different spectra. We only have our senses and then our instruments.
Right.
And so you pick up weird things here and there, and then you can't remember it correctly.
Yeah. And the other thing one other thing I want to point out before we got to take a break here, but I was going to point out one more thing, and that's it. We live in it's hard to remember this, to keep this in mind, but I start thinking about this whenever I start hearing these kinds of accounts of, even now when I hear accounts of ghosts or strange poltergeists or lights in the sky or anything like that, is that we live in this incredibly dynamic and very powerful system of electromagnets and light, and we're right next to this giant star that's putting out a whole bunch of light and magnetism, and we are spinning around it on a spinning thing that's got its own electromagnetism. So we're in this really weird, complicated magnet system, and that may have all kinds of. And then inside of this spinning ball that we're on, there's all these weird metals, and they're sort of laced through it in strange ways, and crystals down into the ground, and all that's spinning, and it's in multiple magnetic fields that are also all spinning, and it just weird stuff is probably going to happen.
Hey, have you guys ever heard of the electric universe theory?
Time to take a break.
Dang it. And shifting the bell curve just by showing up here at the 10 by 10 by 10 Tangent Cube of Science. And we are back here with Seriah from Where Did the Road Go? Looking forward to continuing this deep dive into Seriah's mechanism.
Is the room you're in really 10 by 10 by 10?
Well,
It's 10 by 10.
yeah, the third dimension is a little off, but we're just rounding it up.
Yeah,
All right.
it's a 10 by 10 garden shed basically that we turned into a studio.
Gotcha.
So it isn't 10 by 10 by 10 because the ceiling isn't that high, but it's close. In the middle, at the top.
And if you measure from the ground,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we put it up on little pylons. So
If you measure from under the ground, you'll definitely get up to the
Yes.
10-foot at some point.
that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And then of course Kyle's built desks and what is that? An amp box back there. So the actual space we sit in is more like 6 by 8. But yes, it is a 10 by 10 by 10.
All right. Just wondering.
Yeah.
So where are we going next, there, buddy?
Oh, well, I mean, on Where Did the Road Go, we've done a show joking around called Everything is Demons,
Oh, yeah.
because you get certain people who are generally very fundamental Christian type people who will be like, no, everything is a demon. It's, if you're encountering this stuff, it's all demons. And I've gotten to the point where I almost feel like everything is poltergeists. And, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but I don't completely not mean it. So whatever you look at in this field, you find poltergeist activity. Obviously ghosts are the one most people associate with poltergeists, which of course it means like noisy ghost or something like that. But people who have UFO encounters, usually it follows with poltergeist activity. People who are in flap areas where there's a lot of stuff going on generally experience poltergeist activity. People who have near-death experiences afterwards experience poltergeist activity. And the thing I came up with a few years ago was what Joshua named the wilderness poltergeist, that when you get people out in the woods hunting for Bigfoot, they're getting rocks thrown at them. They're hearing vocalizations, mimicry, and this is all poltergeist activity.
Yeah.
So it seems like no matter where you look on this, and Louis Proud wrote a book on spontaneous human combustion, where he basically suggests that spontaneous human combustion is a form of poltergeist activity.
I did hear you say that. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes. Which was there a specific part you wanted me to elaborate on?
Well, just spontaneous human combustion. How is that poltergeist activity? How exactly?
Okay. So it took him a whole book to get around to making this
Okay.
work.
Yeah.
It does work. Basically, poltergeist activity can start fires.
Okay.
We have seen this in numerous poltergeist cases throughout the recorded history of like parapsychology and such. His theory is that these people who have the spontaneous human combustion have certain characteristics that most of them are not happy. They're not necessarily living their lives, but they're also not people who would kill themselves.
Yeah.
And that this becomes almost like an unconscious suicide thing. Like they're literally so miserable that they cause themselves to burst into flames, which sounds ridiculous. But when you actually look at the work he did on it, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So it's plausible, at least.
Yes, it's
Okay.
definitely plausible.
Okay.
And there's no good explanation for it otherwise. That's the other thing, is that we have never had a really working idea of how spontaneous human combustion comes about.
That's right. Yeah. So it's valid also in that sense that there are no other good ideas. So if this is, yeah.
Yeah, and he has a lot of different. I mean, that book's well worth reading. He has a lot of different cases in there. Unfortunately, he stopped researching the paranormal. So that's like Borderlands Volume 1 or something like that, but there'll never be a Volume 2, I guess.
I don't know. We had a guest on this show, Bob Johnson, who he's a geologist for oil and gas and spent a lot of time in the Middle East. And one of the jobs he got
Oh, yeah.
was there was a town. I can't remember where it was. He sent us
In Saudi Arabia. Something
yeah.
Like
Anyway, there was a town where these people were experiencing all of this weird spontaneous combustion, like inside their houses in strange places, little spots on the carpet, and then like inside cabinets.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, and so they went in and they did all this research, and they were trying to figure out, okay, is there some kind of methane gas coming up out of the ground in the area, and they used all their instruments and everything they had at their with their whatever, their scientific instruments and everything, could find no plausible explanation for all of this stuff. And he has all these pictures of the places that were scorched and burned, and it makes no sense.
Like the insides of cabinets.
Yeah.
Right? Like it didn't burn the outside. It was just like a fire started on the inside of the cabinet.
And the whole town, the people there, they were calling it the djinn.
Yeah.
Yep.
They said that it was the djinn that were, it was possessed or something. I don't know.
And he also had the story of that the local police would like chase fireballs out in the desert or something. Like there was so many strange reports and accounts from that area.
Yeah. So if anybody thinks that poltergeist activity or spontaneous combustion if they're laughing about that, I mean, this guy literally went out there with a team of scientists to try to figure out a legit physical explanation for this thing, and they really couldn't come up with anything.
That's right.
They had ideas that they wrote in their report, but he's just like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and it could be that this stuff has multiple causes too, and that's more than likely the case. I mean, things like Kundalini can make you feel like you're about to burst into flames. I mean, you can get so hot, you're just like, holy crap. And I've talked to, since I've done shows on Kundalini, I've talked to a couple people. Like I had someone tell me that their significant other was watching flames pop out of his toes or something.
Wow.
While he was having a massive Kundalini, surge. So it's, there could be numerous things that could be, and that also could be related to whatever poltergeist activity is at the same time.
I was going to say, what is Kundalini? I mean, you could go read some stuff and hear stories about it, but that doesn't, I don't know. Really know what it is?
I've had weird bursts of poltergeist activity. And I treat it like it's an external force, but I don't necessarily believe it's an external force. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like any of this stuff, it's hard to draw a line of what's us and what's not, because there's so much about us, even on the basic levels, like what keeps our body going, that is not conscious. Yeah. So, look at your dream life, look at all this stuff, and it's all unconscious, uncontrolled by us. So if there are parts of us that are even, can affect reality even more, then it would almost be like dealing with something that's an other rather than a part of ourselves.
Yeah. And I think I've heard you say this before, that the other may actually still be yourself. It's just your higher self or something.
Right. And that, yeah, certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
It also, or it could be something else. We'll get to that idea in a bit. But so the thing with poltergeist activity, and one of the reasons I liked looking at poltergeist activity in relation to all this stuff is that with the state of psi research today, scientifically, you can pretty much prove that psi, as in telekinesis, telepathy, things like this, exist. They've only been able to replicate it in labs on minor scales, but if it can exist on a minor scale, then there's no reason to think it can't exist on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
So, they may only be able to subtly move objects in a vacuum or in change the randomness of something, but that's significant. That means your mind is making a connection to something it's not directly connected to.
Right. Like, I think what you're saying is they've shown it statistically, which is hard to see case by case, but statistically, it's anomalous and it's there, which does imply that there may be extraordinary circumstances where it happens in a single case in a very powerful way.
Right. Because emotion also seems to play a part in it.
Right.
So the traditional poltergeist idea is usually based around, more than often than not, a girl, prepubescent or early puberty, usually in a bad life situation, broken home, something like that. And those are the majority of the poltergeist cases that have been studied. And they'll tell you there's a source. It's usually a person. The poltergeist activity behaves around. Sometimes after it gets going, it sort of takes off on its own a little bit. So it might happen even if the person's not home, but not most of the time. So there's two ways of looking at that. You could say, well, a ghost is attaching itself to this person. Or you could say, well, this person is, the parapsychological view is that this person is expressing, they're expressing psychokinetic energy unconsciously.
Yeah.
And they don't know they're doing it. They have no control over it. They don't know it's them. A lot of times when they bring these kids to therapy and stuff, the poltergeist stuff calms down, which again suggests that the emotional component is very strong. So when you're in a lab doing this, you don't have an emotional component. You don't care. You're just like, oh, I hope I can prove psychic abilities, but there's nothing emotionally strong about your connection to it. That makes sense?
It does. Yeah, I'm following you.
Okay. So, with people who have UFO experiences and near-death experiences, of course, these are also, when you see the poltergeist stuff there, Kenneth Ring was the first one to point out that connection in the Omega Project. He had read Whitley Strieber's book, much against his... he was just like, no, I do near-death experiences. I don't believe in aliens. He read Communion and was like, holy crap, there's a lot of connections here. And he did a study of people who had UFO experiences, abduction experiences, and people who had near-death experiences, and then a control group. I mean, he's a psychologist, so he did it, as a scientific study. And he found that the sort of the archetype of the near-death experience and the alien abduction are very similar, but the after effects, including poltergeist activity, are almost the exact same thing. Which shouldn't be if you're dealing with aliens versus dying. That kind of broke me early on because that book came out in like 92 and I picked it up and it just I'm like, how does this make sense? Are the aliens abducting us when we're dead? I mean, what's going on?
Yeah.
But that prevalence of poltergeist activity moving through everything has just gotten to the point where, like, everywhere I look, I'm like, oh, look, poltergeist activity. You see people who even, you'll have someone say, oh, my house is haunted. All this stuff just started happening. And then you go, so what's going on in your life? And you find out they're in a really stressful point in their life. Not only is it maybe liminal, but they're just under a lot of stress, a lot of emotion. And it's like, yeah, you're the poltergeist. Okay.
Right.
And of course, telling them that doesn't necessarily help. Sometimes having someone go in and, cleanse the area and stuff will make them feel better and reduce their stress and thus reduce the poltergeist activity.
Yeah, it happens to some of the girls in some of the more famous cases, right? I'm not sure if you said this, but they start getting the attention and then the activity stops happening.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And that's when they start faking stuff because they like the attention.
Yeah.
And so you get this sort of the mainstream scientific view where this is fake. Look, they caught them faking. Yeah, they caught them faking near the end of the activity.
Right.
So the other act, and it's not, the same activity. They're like the Enfield is just such a great case, which the Warrens were not involved with, despite the movies and other claims.
Right.
But, police officers were there when things were thrown across the room, when no one moved. I mean, there was so many witnesses to this poltergeist activity. There was no doubt there was something legitimate going on. But yeah, the girls really liked the attention. So at a certain point, when the activity started to calm down, they started trying to fake it, and they got caught almost immediately because they weren't good at it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that does imply that there's something about the stress, right? Because they start getting attention. They're now, for whatever reason, they're under less stress. Somehow this is making them happier. So then eventually the phenomena starts to taper off, and then they start trying to fake it in order to keep the attention that was making them happy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so and I think when it's not situations like that, when I think it's just random people who can generate this, some people do, some people don't. But you find almost every time they're in a stressful situation when the poltergeist stuff kicks in.
Right.
And so it's definitely tied to emotion. What it is about these anomalous experiences, like near-death experiences or UFO experiences that intensify that's a whole nother question. Why do these, and also you have areas that are known for poltergeist activity, especially during flap time periods. So I think there's a bunch of factors that come into play when we experience this stuff. There's us, first of all, and it's hard to separate us from whatever's happening. There are definitely environmental factors. As I'm sure I've mentioned to you guys before, one of Robert Schoch's books talks about how laboratory psi research, people tested during high solar activity performed significantly better than during low solar activity.
Yeah. That one is puzzling.
Well, it's higher energy. It's changing your ability to, however this stuff works, which we really don't know. It must be that the sun is creating more energy for us to work with.
Yeah, maybe it's my own. I'm looking at it the wrong way, but I would view higher solar activity. Usually, I associate that with like sunspots and things.
Right.
That's probably what he's talking about, right? Sunspots are very disruptive. They're energetic, but they're they happen in pulses and they make a lot of noise in the electromagnetic spectrum. And so, to me, I would think it would be the other way around, but it isn't. That makes it interesting. Yeah.
And I think that's what I said to him. I said I thought it would be the other way around. Like when it was calm, the energy, our psychic energy would be better. And he's like, nope, it's when the sun is active.
Yeah, so that made me wonder when I was thinking about this. I started to wonder if it's a secondary effect, because there is, high solar activity does it. Not only does that put out all this noise and all this electromagnetic energy, but it also stops other things from happening so much, like cosmic ray impacting into the atmosphere. It blocks a lot of cosmic rays, for example. So it's possible that, and cosmic rays, they're enormously long, massive Christmas tree-looking collision chains of high-energy particles coming in from the rest of the universe and impacting our atmosphere and causing. I mean, that's how we get things like C14. All these radioactive particles that are in our atmosphere are caused by cosmic rays. So I wonder if it's something like that higher solar activity actually stops those kinds of things from happening, and then that allows people to have higher psi abilities.
Could be. One of the ideas I like to play with is that one of the first people I ever talked to about this stuff, and it was still when I was doing the music show, was Walter Cruttenton on his book Lost Star of Myth and Time, I think it's called. And, he postulates that we have a second sun, and that's what causes the change of the ages.
Yeah.
And there's some evidence it could be Sirius, that Sirius might be connected to our sun and our planet. But so at this point, it's, just Sirius is moving towards us, but it's still quite a distance away. The golden age would be when Sirius was the closest to us. And of course, in the golden age, we're supposed to have all these superhuman powers.
Right.
So maybe somehow these suns, our sun and another sun, it puts us in an energy field where we can access more than we can now.
Yeah. Yeah. If we're close to two stars.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that would be a lot more solar radiation. And then we would all be really good at psychic stuff. That is an interesting idea.
So, I mean, it may not be anything, but it's like putting those two things together, I'm like, what if, you know?
Yeah. So does that mean, I mean, I'm trying to remember if he did this, but does that mean that like have they tried putting somebody in a Faraday cage to try the psi stuff and then they're terrible at it?
I know they've done it, and I think they've gotten mixed results.
Okay. So maybe
Like
it is a secondary effect.
Cheryl Lee, I think, was put in a Faraday cage, and she was still able to do a lot of the stuff that they wanted her to do. But I don't remember off the top of my head, so I'm not 100% sure. I would have to ask her.
Yeah.
But she had 3 near-death experiences. She will, even slight emotional, bumps with her will cause all kinds of poltergeist stuff to happen. She'll short out electronics, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
I mean, one of the times I had her on talking about them, she has I can't remember exactly what it was. Like she had like LED lights around her computer because if they start lighting up, she knows she's affecting stuff. And she was getting very emotional talking about the near-death stuff. And she suddenly just said, I need to go for a minute. I'll be back in a few minutes, and hung up. And I was like, oh, I hope I didn't like bother her, like talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And she got back and she's like, okay, I'm all right. And I'm like, are you okay? And she's like, oh yeah. She goes, the LED lights around my computer were starting to light up, and I didn't want to fry my computer.
Wow. That's pretty wild.
So, I mean, there are people who have those extreme sort of cases of this poltergeist type energy. And there's no doubt this stuff is coming from her and being triggered by, emotional states.
Yeah.
So whatever poltergeist energy is, not only can we prove it on a micro scale in the lab, but we also know it's affected by emotion.
Yeah. So another question I have about the poltergeist, you were mentioning that you've talked about the wilderness poltergeist, like the Sasquatch, or people just going out to look for Sasquatch and getting poltergeist-like effects. Now, in those cases, would that be environmental? Because I don't know if you would be able to blame it on the person, right?
I would think it would be environmental, but you know what? We're also so disconnected from the wilderness.
Yeah.
That, some people going out into the wilderness for the first time might, bring some energy up that they don't normally have access to.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. I'm just wondering because, you think of the house poltergeist cases in so often are associated with a single person, like you said, a younger girl or whatever, somebody who's in a bad situation. But, if you're just going out and looking for Bigfoot, maybe you are bringing all that baggage with you out into the woods, but it's just weird that there are places where people associate poltergeist activity that don't necessarily have someone living there.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like it's multiple things. It can't just be the person. Yeah.
Right. And again, I think that's the problem. People keep trying to break it down to like, oh, here's the universal answer to all this stuff, and I don't think that's going to happen. Right. Because there's different factors that affect different things. Now, again, with Enfield, you had this very intense poltergeist activity happening. And at one point, she started channeling the guy who used to live there. And she could supposedly, the one researcher had her take a mouthful of water and then put duct tape over her mouth. And you could still hear the guy's voice. Despite her having a mouthful of water, he could still talk through her. So they weren't really, they were kind of like, we don't know what this is. But the thing is, all the information that this entity gave them was completely accurate. Where he died, who he was, when he lived there, all this other stuff. So you have to then say, okay, was she picking this stuff up from the environment? Was it just information in the environment? And since she was sensitive to it, it was there? Or was an entity there that suddenly sees a power source?
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like she started acting like a medium in that case, right? That's,
right, exactly. Yeah. So, it's like in their spectrum, suddenly she blinks on and they can go, ooh, we could use this.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes it complicated. That definitely makes it complex because if a poltergeist is or poltergeist activity is if we want to think about it as being maybe some latent ability of the girl or whoever it is the person is that's doing it, but then you suddenly start channeling correct information about a person you had no idea about. Now you're getting into something strange, and then I guess you could say it's psychometry. She's picking it up from the environment, like you said. But then how is she projecting the voice? I guess poltergeists do make voices.
Yes,
yeah,
they do. Vocalizations are a big part of it. Mimicry is a big part of it.
Yeah.
And one of the arguments against the wilderness poltergeist too is people will be like, but that behaves like an ape in the woods, and it's like, right. And in a house, it behaves like a ghost. It's that's not what it is. It's an expression of this energy, and it's behaving based on expectation.
Yeah. So does it have agency, or are we just talking about energy?
Yeah, I mean, it might have agency after a point. I mean, it could essentially be a tulpa of some sort after a while.
Right.
But it still needs that energy, and once that energy dissipates, someone gets attention or the stress, goes down, it's not there anymore. It kind of dissipates.
Yeah, there's no handle for it to grab onto anymore.
And we have no way of measuring what this energy is. This is part of the reason science won't touch this stuff, is that we don't have, not only don't we have a mechanism for mind affecting matter, but when you deal with, we can call it poltergeist energy, but we don't know what it is, other than the fact that it can affect our environment.
Right.
And you'll see certain skeptics say things like, well, we don't know how that would work, so it can't. And it's kind of like, no, that's not how it works.
That's not quite how science works. That's right.
I mean, I guess you can do it that way, but you're not getting at the truth.
Yeah. I think one there was a geneticist that we quoted on one of our shows who said a lot of people are like, well, that can't be true because I didn't already believe it. That's a great quote.
Yeah. Yep. There was another quote I liked, and I can't remember what it was. Oh, yeah, I don't remember. It was another skeptic quote that, and the thing is, there's one of the guys who was a big part of the psychop organization actually came out and said that there is enough evidence for psi that if it was anything else, it would be a proven fact.
Yeah.
However, since it's psi, we need more evidence.
Yeah, they keep dragging the goalposts. That's classic. Yeah.
Yeah, and he said, because we know this doesn't exist, and it's like, just admitted that scientifically it can be proven to exist.
Yeah. Yep. I think what you seem to be pointing at, though, with all of this, the poltergeist stuff, and when I was listening to your presentations on it, you were saying like you want to look at this without all the preconceptions, and I agree. And I started to think that like we shouldn't even be using the word poltergeist, except that that's what people call it. But poltergeist itself conjures up all kinds of a priori or preconceptions.
Sure.
And it's so poltergeist activity, but it isn't an angry ghost, right?
Yes.
We don't know what it is. In some cases, it seems to be attached to a person, or it seems to be okay. How can I minimalize this the most? It centers around a person in a lot of cases where it's happening in a living area. But we have the same sort of phenomena taking place out in the wilderness or even in abandoned buildings that aren't occupied anymore. And in those cases, it seems to be environmental, but then the question would be, does it take place when no one's there?
Right.
Like I know there's plenty of people have done this, trying to put out cameras out the woods to find Bigfoot or whatever. And the cameras, either they get messed up somehow or that they never find anything.
Right.
So the question is, so if the camera gets messed up, then something happened out in those woods. But if the camera just never sees anything, then that implies that that this phenomena requires the presence of a person in an emotional state.
Right.
And I guess
state can even be excitement. You know,
yes,
you're out looking for Bigfoot. That's exciting.
Yeah. I mean, and a little freaky, right? You're out in a place and you're like, man, this is where everybody sees Bigfoot, and we're out in the middle of the wilderness, and you're excited and nervous. Yeah. So I see, to me, if we're going to try to back away and peel away all of the preconceptions and everything, what we're dealing with here is something that people experience in many different environments that may or may not take place when people are not there, but most of the time, to capture it, it requires people to be there.
Right. We seem to be an integral part of the equation.
Yeah.
But I don't know what else to call it other than poltergeist. You know, I mean, there's no other real good term for it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like talking about Kundalini. I mean, that's just a term that was put on it, but there's other people who have called it other things. You know, it's just you got to use a convenient term sometimes to identify something.
Nope, I'm not going to allow you to do any more of this podcast till you come up with a better word. We're stopping right now. No, it's fine. I was just pointing out that poltergeist also comes with some preconceptions, but I agree that we need to call it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's usually one of the first things I have to address, that we're not talking about a ghost. We're not talking about not talking about something that only happens in a ghost-like setting.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the thing that stands out to me that poltergeist-wise that happened was when I was about to do a show, and I had muted. I was listening to the satellite radio, like whatever comes in through Dish Network or DirecTV. I had the metal station on. I usually kept it muted unless a song I liked came on, and something from like Killing Joke came on, and I went, "Oh, cool, Killing Joke," and I unmuted it. And the song ended, and it went into AC/DC. I'm not a fan of AC/DC, so I muted it. And I left the room, and as I got outside to the next room, the stereo came on and cranked all the way to full volume. Now, that's loud. That's really loud. Like, I walked in the room, I'm like, oh my God, and I'm running for the controller and turning the volume down, and then I mute it. And then I hear this loud bang. And in the room I just left, this big cast iron, like meat grinder that was my grandmother's, that was sitting on the back of a shelf, is now in the middle of the floor. And so I walk out and I'm looking, I'm like, okay, that's something. And I walk over to the meat grinder, and the AC/DC cranks up at full volume again. And I'm like, okay. And I walk back in there and I mute it, and I say out loud, I don't like AC/DC. Stop turning that on. And so nothing else happened until we went to do the show. And the Ars Technica mic I have has a switch on it for on off. And it's a very physical switch. It's not something that can accidentally just trigger. So we're talking, we're doing the show. I'm not touching the microphone, and the microphone clicks off. And I didn't hear it. I didn't notice it do it. All of a sudden they can't hear me. And I'm like, they're like, you still there? And I'm like, yeah, what? And I'm like, what's going on? I'm checking the wire. And then I noticed the switch is off, and I'm like, well, that can't happen. All right. So I turned it back on. They can hear me just fine. I'm like, well, maybe it was, almost off or something, and it just clicked the rest of the way. A few minutes later, it does it again. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be fun. And then nothing. Didn't do it again. And I went,
you shouldn't have muted AC/DC, man. You pissed it off.
Apparently. And so then the next day, like nothing else happened that night. This was a Friday night. The next day, Saturday night, I grabbed the CD case I take to the radio station, and the cover, it's one that zips up and it holds the full-size CDs.
Yeah.
So I will put it on the floor so that the cover, if the cover was open, the cover would flop open and the CDs would fall out. So I pick it up, and CDs go everywhere because the cover is open, but it was still closed. I couldn't have put it down that way. And I'm just like, okay, what else did you do?
Man, shouldn't have muted that AC/DC.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah. Someone joked that it all had to do with like audio and music, and I said the meat grinder, and they're like, "Yeah, it's heavy metal."
Yeah,
That's right.
that really loud
And it's
AC/DC just threw that meat grinder out in the middle of the floor.
And it's one of those things where, like, I don't even think there was anything, specifically tense or, anything like that going on in my life. It just was this sudden outbreak of poltergeist activity, and then it was done.
Yeah, but you have Kundalini, so you're probably more of a special case. You probably don't have to be in highly emotional states for that stuff to happen, right?
That is true.
Yeah.
And the Kundalini just kind of does what it wants, honestly.
Right. It's got its own state.
To some degree.
Yeah, it has its own state, and it seems to be. I mean, we've talked about this at length, and it seems to be in a lot of cases separate from whatever's happening with you. It has its own thing.
Yep.
And it'll start up, and you'll be like, and you're like, I don't have time for this right now.
Or really like to sleep.
Yeah. All right, let's take another break. This is fantastic.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, we'll come back for the second half of the show with Seriah. Back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, where we are almost always wrong almost all of the time. But we have a guest on here who's probably slightly less wrong than we are. Seriah from Where Did the Road Go? We've been having a fantastic conversation with him about some of the work he's been doing and just the things he's been thinking about on all kinds of paranormal activity and UFO activity, and putting it all together and wondering if there are connections and if we might be able to look at all these things as part of some kind of similar phenomena. And Seriah, so we were talking during the break, Seriah, and I wanted to bring this up that, you said that you were talking about how people who had UFO experiences and people who had near-death experiences had similar experiences.
Yes.
Like that seemed to be poltergeist related and other kinds of strange psi phenomena.
And Kundalini awakening.
Yeah. So to me, on the one hand, I guess you would look at that and say, how can that be if these are two totally different things? But another way to look at it might be that once someone has been awakened to any kind of extra normal experience, like a near-death experience or a UFO experience or an abduction or something like that, that this does open them up. It changes them, and then they begin to have these poltergeist-like Kundalini. Because, again, one of the things we're talking about is could these poltergeist-like things be actually focused on a person? So is that possible? That the
Kind of like the opening of the third eye in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Or like
it's certainly possible.
Yeah.
I think my gut feeling at this point is that near-death experiences and what people think of as alien abductions are far more connected than we realize.
Yeah.
They both seem to be almost shamanic awakening experiences.
Yes, I agree with that.
And, and the thing is, one of the reasons I started really getting into studying this stuff, so part of it's just a personal journey. Honestly, but part of the reason I started, really trying to figure it out was because we're looking at phenomena that we've been studying in some cases for centuries, and we've gotten nowhere. So, like, it says to me that if after all this time of studying this stuff, we're no further along than we were 50 years ago, say, we're probably on the wrong track.
Yeah.
If UFOs were as simple as extraterrestrials coming to the planet, we would know by now. If Bigfoot was just an ape in the woods, we would know by now. And even the most, hardened flesh and blood Bigfoot person will tell you, yeah, I don't know why we haven't found one by now. Like a body, captured one. I mean, nothing's perfect. No animal out there is so perfect that with all these people looking for it, no one's ever been able to find as much as a body, much less a live one.
Right.
And with UFOs, there's just way too many UFO sightings. I mean, even when you discount all the ones that are possibly something known, you still have too many UFO sightings and too much variation in them to suggest that, some people from another planet came here to visit us.
Yeah.
It's like that doesn't, and I think Jacques Vallée pointed out that if this stuff is not oriented towards us, if they're just showing up to collect, samples of, foliage or whatever, we're only seeing them, a small fraction of the time they're here, which means there must be, how many sightings going on a regular basis that we don't see, or how many visitations?
Yeah. I've got a multi-level point here that I've been brewing on. So
right.
you brought up in the beginning of, the thing with the gorilla. So there's the obvious aspect of our existence, our experience, that there are things that we pay attention to and things that we don't. You can, like, just from my experience doing audio editing, like, I may become aware of some noise that I had never heard before in a song. And then, like, say it's a mistake, like playing guitar and the pick is smacking the body of the guitar and it makes this tick sound.
Right.
Tick, 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 like that. I hear it one time. And then when I start going through all the music, I hear it all over the place. Never had heard it before.
Yep.
And so I start noticing it and I become more and more sensitive to it. So there's that aspect of our ability to experience or see these things that you may just not be paying attention, or like the third eye idea that you may have senses that become heightened. And then once they're heightened, then you're paying attention to them a lot more and you develop that sense even more.
Right.
To where you start seeing stuff all the time, and then there are times when you maybe get too focused on other things, and that sense sort of goes away. It's no longer being exercised, and so you have a period in your life where all this crazy stuff happened, and it was because you were paying attention to it all the time. So that's one idea. Another one is like the idea of agency behind these things. I think of. Take, for example, I was trying to think of an analogy. So if you're sitting in a room and it's perfectly still, but there's a window and you're looking outside, and out in the sky, you see something, flying around, circling around out there. And you're like, what is that flying around up in the sky? Well, if there was nothing else in your field of view, but just say the skylight or something, you're looking up there and you're seeing something flying around. It might look like it has agency, like it's a bug or a bird or something that's darting around up there. But if you went outside, you might notice there's all this other environmental stuff going on. There's wind blowing around, and it's just like a feather or a leaf that's being whirled up and moved around for a time. It has no agency, right? But it could be a bug. So like some bug or some animal could look just like, or be making the same types of moves as a thing that doesn't have any consciousness or isn't thinking about what it's doing or attempting to do things.
Sure.
So you have scenarios in nature where you can't tell without the broader context whether there's agency or there isn't. But the point is that sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. And I just top that off with that all of those things, an outside with wind blowing around and light reflecting off of something for you to sense it, whether it's a leaf or an actual bug, you have to have the entire environment of the universe, nature, in order to get that scenario in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of like what Marty has been talking to us about with the UFO phenomena. Trying to lump all of this stuff into one thing is probably not the best way to go about it, because we do live in this vast universe with all kinds of forces interacting. Like with the solar activity, there's so many subtle things going on, possibly creating, there's all different kinds of environmental scenarios that there's just no way to really be able to figure out exactly what the scenario was when one person was in the woods thinking or feeling whatever they were feeling, and whether or not their experience was a being or something that they just noticed when they had never noticed things like that before. So it's very complicated. It's kind of what I'm getting.
No, it is very, and that's exactly part of what I'm trying to show. Like I said, when I'm trying to write this book, I'm going, oh man, like there's so many things this connects to. It's not like a simple answer. There's a lot of different stuff going on. It certainly involves things like consciousness, but it also involves environment and perception and all this other stuff. And it's almost infinitely complex.
Yes.
And that's why I think, now the big thing is trying to find this silver bullet that explains all paranormal phenomenon. It's like, you're not going to do that.
Right.
Like, because all of this stuff is different. Even if some of it's from the same source, it's coming out in different ways. And look at, when you talk about agency, look at the Marfa lights. So, those lights will, if someone chases them, they'll run away. But if you're standing there, they'll move closer to you. Some of this might be explained by simple electromagnetic effects. But, people who experience them say, oh, they seem like they're conscious. That doesn't mean they are.
Right.
Like, we don't know. I mean, yes, they seem to behave like they're conscious in some of their behaviors. But again, those behaviors might just be like, okay, so when you're driving a car toward them, you're literally pushing them away from you. And when you're standing still, they're just kind of hovering in towards you in some kind of field that we don't understand quite how it works.
Yeah. And there could also be a combination of multiple of these things. Like, you start to become aware of things that you're not normally aware of. You start heightening certain senses. And then there are strange interactions of different energies and things at one time, and your emotional state. And maybe some agency out there takes advantage of the energy, like you were talking about, and you do actually have an encounter with something. But maybe the next time you notice that thing, it doesn't have agency. I mean, this could be any number of combinations.
So the other thing is, you mentioned, like, when people focus on this stuff, there are certainly people who have one-off experiences.
Yeah.
Most of those are sort of this, like, distant sort of thing, like they see a weird light in the sky. Most people have had at least one or two weird experiences that they can't explain. Whether or not it's truly something unexplainable by our current, knowledge is another thing. But, like, usually even people who claim, like, oh, I don't believe in that stuff, and then you talk to them a few minutes and they'll be like, well, there was this one time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so, you have that, someone might once in their life see a Bigfoot run across the road. But what you see more commonly
Could have been a hybrid.
is that people have experiences and then they have more experiences.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be a matter of, now you're open to this, you're focused on it. But recurring experiences, like legitimate recurring experiences, are actually more common than singular experiences. And occasionally you'll hear people say, oh, well, I don't believe anyone who's had a bunch of experiences. Why would they, why would all these different things happen to them? And it's a matter of, well, they may not be that different. There may be a common thread that runs through all these things, that once you have this experience, why does someone who has a Bigfoot encounter in the woods then have poltergeist activity? Well, those two things should be separate things. And then, a year later, they see a UFO, and it's like, oh, you think, well, they're just making it up at this point, but that's actually not uncommon at all.
Yeah, and that does imply that there is some kind of connection, whatever it may be, whether the connection is being made through the person or the connection is that all of these phenomena are somehow associated with each other in some way.
At least in the way that you might detect them.
Yeah, that's right.
You're able to experience them. But, there is obviously there are going to be scenarios where once you have the first experience, you become like, it's kind of like you're looking over your shoulder all the time. And then maybe you mistake certain things, or it's easier for you to believe that the book just flew off the shelf when there really was a plausible, just regular everyday
Cat
in the room knocking your books off the shelf. That you don't go looking for that because you've now accepted, you've accepted these extraordinary circumstances because of a truly extraordinary experience that you've had. So that can also happen, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, certainly. And I mean, there have been times where, I mean, the thing is, I drill down on this stuff as much as possible, where I'm like, okay, what's actually happening here? Is there another explanation for it? Because sometimes I'll experience something that seems strange, but I'm like, and I will exhaust every possibility trying to make sure that it's not that I'm missing something.
Right.
There was, so I'm sitting at my computer, and as I'm sitting at my computer, I keep hearing this faint ringing noise from the next room. And I'm like, what is that? And I walk into the next room and I hear nothing. And I come back and I sit at the computer and I'm doing stuff and I hear a faint ringing noise. But every time I get up, it stops. And I'm like, why is it only happening when I'm sitting at the computer? So my girlfriend at the time comes in and I said, okay, I'm just going to sit here and work. Tell me if you hear a ringing noise. And I start working and she goes, yeah. And she walks over and the mouse cable was rubbing a hard drive cage. Very, very light. So every time I moved the mouse, it was just very lightly rubbing it and making sort of a ringing noise. And I'm like, okay, thanks, But it was behind where the computer monitor was, so I didn't even know it was there.
Yeah.
You sound like an IT guy. Your computer is actually multiple pieces laying in a tray on the back of the desk.
No comment. But yeah, I mean, so sometimes you can't do that. Something happens, you go, I don't know what that was.
Right.
And especially with Kundalini, like there was an experience a few weeks ago where I'm sure probably all of it was in my head because I had a massive Kundalini burst. I laid down. This buzzing that was in my ears suddenly stopped. I didn't even know there was a buzzing until it stopped. And I was like, whoa, okay, the buzzing stopped that I didn't know was there. That's interesting. And then a little bit later, so as soon as that happened, I started seeing like all these, like I, for some reason, looked at my hands and I'm seeing these like designs and stuff on the backs of my hands. Like there was enough light in the room where I could just vaguely see the back of my hands. And it went from like almost geometric designs to almost looking like cartoons, like if you were projecting it from a film projector on a rough surface. And I'm going, what? Okay, that's a pretty cool hallucination, and I'm just watching it. I know it's not real. They're not really there. And eventually it fades. And then I hear this super loud boom, almost like an explosion from the other side of the house. And I'm like, I don't think that was real. I think that was in my head. And a moment later, I feel like the vibration of it just run through my body, and then everything stopped. Like the whole Kundalini episode ended.
Wow.
And I'm like, I'm pretty sure every bit of that was totally in my head.
Man.
Okay, I got one.
Yeah.
I have not been able to figure out if this is real or not. But occasionally, I can't even tell you with what frequency. I guess maybe this has happened, I don't know, a handful of times, where I'll be laying in bed at night, going to sleep, and I've got my eyes closed, and I'm seeing the room.
Yeah.
Like in a dim light.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute. And I open my eyes, and it's like, okay, close my eyes, still seeing the room. And then I can take my hand and move my hand around above my face, and I can see it like a dim light.
Yep.
That's in the shape of my hand. And even I can close and open my hand, hold up fingers, everything. And my eyes are totally closed. And I'm like, I haven't been able to figure this out. And then sometimes if I try to do it, it just doesn't work at all. I can't see it.
I've had that happen before. And one of the things I'll do when that happens, I'm like, am I actually see?
Yeah.
I'll try and look at something like, say, the clock. and be like, okay, can I read what time it is? And I can never do it.
Yeah. I don't have a clock, but I can definitely see my hand, which is the weird thing. And I'm like, I don't know. I should grab Laura's hand and put it in front of my face. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. The most common thing that happens to me is I get these popping noises.
And
Exploding. No. I'm. It's not when I'm going to sleep. I'll just be in my, up in the tower in my house, and I'll be at the computer desk reading or doing something, and behind me or somewhere in the room around me somewhere, something pops really loud. Like it sounds like somebody like flicked the table. You know what I mean? It's not coming from a wall or the floor or the ceiling. It's coming from a table or I've got all these. I've got a light table in there that's right behind me, and I've got a coffee table over next to me, and then there's another table off to the left, and then there's my desk in front of me, and it always sounds like something on one of those surfaces just went pow, like somebody flicked it, like popped it with their hand.
Huh.
And this happens often enough to where I'm just like, okay, yeah, I'll look in the direction to see, did something fall over, Nothing,
yeah.
And nothing has ever moved, and it's not the house settling because it isn't coming out of the walls or the floor or the ceiling. And I can never figure out what it is, but it sounds like something is like tapping or like slapping the table really loud. And this happens, I don't know, a couple of times a month.
Huh.
And it's pretty random. And now I'll hear it, bow, and I'll look over there. I'm like, yeah, okay.
You can never trust anything, though, because you have a cat.
That's right. I do have a cat.
I wonder how much people regularly experience very minor poltergeist things.
Yeah.
And don't even know it. Like they don't notice it, or they just, assume it's their cat.
Yeah. Or it's the people will say, oh, that was the house settling. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Explain to me how it made that noise just now. Give me the physics on how we just got that really loud screeching noise from your house or whatever.
And it could be little outbursts of energy that don't mean a lot.
Yeah.
But just, it's just kind of like a release valve.
Yes. And I try to pay attention to stuff like that because I'm, like you are and like Kyle, I'm interested in weird things. Mm-hmm. So when weird things happen, I pay a lot of attention to them and I focus on them and I ask myself, is there, a regular explanation, a mundane explanation for this, and what would it be? Or do I say, okay, that was actually really weird? And
like with the computer example, it's easy to not be able to figure out the mundane explanation sometimes because there might be just stuff in the environment you're not aware of.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So these popping noises, they never freak me out, but I have yet to be able to determine what causes it
or where they're coming from.
Or where they're coming from exactly. I kind of know the direction in general, but in the end, I don't decide, okay, that was a poltergeist. I'm just like, all right, I don't know what that was.
That's how I feel about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was, but I'm going back to sleep.
That's right.
There have been times where as soon as I lay down, I'll hear a voice say something, and I'll be like, okay, if there was a camera in here, would it have picked up the voice? Like, was it in my head? What was that? And sometimes it's creepy stuff. Like, I was just recording some notes from the last few months because I kind of fell behind. And there was one where I laid down to go to sleep and I turned the lights off and a woman's voice whispered, "There's somebody in the house."
Oh, man.
And
why couldn't they say, "Hey, Siri, turn on the lights"?
And I'm laying there and I literally wrote down that I said, I know there's not someone in the house. And then I have like wise cams everywhere. So I picked up the phone, I checked all the wise cams. I was like, there's no one in the house. Why would you do that?
Yeah. Man.
Like whether it just be my brain doing some auditory hallucination or what, it's just like, of all the things you could whisper to me.
Right.
And it's me.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that was the other thing I said. Yeah, it was you. You just whispered in my ear.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I know. Thanks. All right. So let's move forward with the mechanism.
Yes. So, and that brings us to I can never remember the guy's name. He wrote a book called Illuminations. French Canadian author. It's gonna drive me nuts.
Maybe the Watcher will figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay, but he proposes UFOs as poltergeists. Now, he looks at it as in more of a societal-based thing. So he's looking at UFO flaps, periods where there are a lot of UFO sightings in one area. And he's trying to, like a poltergeist, say, okay, is there societal stress happening at this point in history that, this might be sort of the release valve for it? So like, a poltergeist, except because it's bigger, it's creating a UFO flap. And like I read the book is great. And he points out things like, again, similarities between UFOs and poltergeists are things like, UFOs, the one that got me that I didn't put together for whatever reason is the falling leaf motion. A lot of times UFOs when they drop, they don't drop straight down. They'll drop down like in this falling leaf motion.
Yeah.
And in poltergeist cases, you'll get like rocks or something or some other heavy object will suddenly appear in the room and then fall in a falling leaf motion like it doesn't weigh anything. And he said that and I went, oh, son of a bitch, she's right.
Yeah.
And like the theory has some merit, like it's interesting, but there were definitely points where he was trying to kind of like fit it together. Like you and Marty were talking about like the Foo Fighters and stuff.
Yes.
Well, what more stressful environment was there than being in a fighter plane in World War II?
Yeah. Especially a bomber.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that could be a group poltergeist phenomena. The Foo Fighters may have just been generated by this heavy emotional energy that was there, generating light phenomena around the planes.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah.
And I think he suggests that in Illuminations. I'm not sure because I don't remember. I haven't read it in a while. It makes so much sense. I can't imagine that he wouldn't have suggested that. But he goes on to suggest other pieces of this, and I was like, wow, this is a really good book. It's a really interesting theory. I'm like, but it's not, like, again, it doesn't explain all UFOs.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a possible mechanism for some UFO encounters, like things like the Foo Fighters. If you're in a military situation or even in a nuclear bunker or something, a nuclear launch site, that's got to be a stressful job in certain situations.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so they if it is similar to poltergeist experience phenomena, then the stress of the people in the situation would maybe be the focal point or the energy source or the causal agent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it may be a group thing rather than an individual thing. And it may also build up too. We don't know if you're in a situation where a bunch of different people are under stress, that energy may build up into the environment, and that's where you may get some of these residual hauntings.
Yeah. That just reminded me of that just reminded me of the other thing that Marty was saying was that some of the bomber pilots or crews noticed that like things were rattling on the outsides of the hulls of their plane.
Yes, you mentioned that. Like there was like a coin or something, wasn't there?
Yeah, he was saying that at least in some cases they turned out to be these weird coins that may have been some kind of a mine attempt, but in other cases that they were just getting like it seemed like little pebbles were being thrown at the plane.
Right. Because I remember you saying almost like a poltergeist, and I'm like, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Poltergeist throwing money. Yep.
But stones, that's super common, and coins wouldn't be out of, out of belief level. I'm sure there's poltergeist cases where coins were thrown.
Yeah, or they just appear out of thin air.
Yeah. Apports are a thing that happen.
Yep.
And that's another thing. We don't know that mechanism. When we were talking earlier about these things, manifesting in our world, we have these apports, these things that just appear, and we don't know where they came from.
Yeah.
There's, again, if we go back to Keith Linder's case of the Seattle Demon House, at one point a Bible appears in front of their bedroom door. The bedroom door is shut. They open the door, and there's a Bible that's been singed.
Oh, yes. I remember this.
And they're like, oh, my God, this thing must be demonic. It just burned a Bible, et cetera, et cetera, which is an understandable response.
Yeah. Yeah.
When Steve Mira tried to replicate that with the same type of Bible, he found that if he put a flame anywhere near one of those pages, they just disintegrated.
Yeah,
he could not replicate that singeing.
Yeah, they're so thin. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the thing about apports is that when people have, like, say, a bunch of pebbles suddenly fall in someone's house that come out of nowhere and they pick them up, they're warm.
Yep.
So whatever process is creating these things, it might be enough to cause these very thin, flammable Bible pages to singe, but not hot enough to actually set them on fire.
Right.
So basically something, or them, whatever this caused this apport of a Bible, may not have meant for it to be a burning Bible. It just happened to do that because, well, it was apported.
Yeah. Yeah, we did 2 shows on a book called Anomalies. And what we focused on for that book, the book is great. I recommend anybody get it. It's full of just weird things that have happened of all kinds. And he does go into UFO cases and things, but the parts we focused on were the anomalous things falling from the sky.
Yes.
And there was some other stuff we focused on too, weird electrical phenomena and stuff. But there was just lots of cases, and Charles Fort did this too, right? That things rain out of the sky with no explanation, but very good. The witnesses are credible, in a lot of cases. And there were cases where rocks are being thrown at a house for days.
Yes.
And cops get called and no one can figure it out. And these stones are coming from, they just seem that no one can figure out the source.
It's almost like Bigfoot's throwing them from the woods.
Yeah, except that they send people out into the woods while the rocks are being thrown, and there's all these people out there searching for the source of these rocks, and they just seem to appear in midair and hit the house. Yeah.
Yep. And in other haunting locations, you get stuff that not only appears but stuff that disappears.
Yes.
And sometimes it reappears, and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, I've talked to people who have regularly had experiences with things disappearing, and they've said, if I say, could I have my brush back? Like, I'll walk into the next room and my brush will be sitting there. So it's almost like even if it is us, it might be working with some of its own agency,
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. That sounds like something with agency, unless there's like I don't know, maybe I guess you could say that the intention, you intentionalize it by saying it, and then your subconscious supplies you the brush that it took away. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, where do you draw that line between us and the other? That's the other thing.
Yeah. How connected is everything, really?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everything might just be one big piece of consciousness splintered off into pieces.
Yeah.
So inevitably, we're all connected.
That's true. Even the standard model says that.
And technically, we all come from the same point of life.
Right.
So we're all connected back at some point to the whatever point life started. There, that's something that's always an interesting way to look at it, because like you can have a kid, but you're really just transferring part of your life force into that child. Like you're not creating life; you're just passing it on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I'd say that one interesting way on the everything is connected, even if you look at it purely from like the standard model physics and materialism, which basically the standard model says that the universe started with the Big Bang. And if you go with quantum physics and how entanglement works, then everything is connected through entanglement because of the Big Bang. Because it all started at that point, and that's how you entangle something. So
Right.
Everything is connected, even if you look at it in a purely materialist way.
So, I like the idea of some UFOs being literally expressions of poltergeist activity. It makes sense. Also, in Bigfoot encounters where people, because most of the time when people have these quote encounters, they don't see a creature. Like 95% of the time, they're getting the vocalizations, the wood knocks, the rocks thrown, but they're not actually seeing an actual creature.
Yeah.
So
That could be anything, right?
yeah, and when the rocks are thrown, if someone goes and picks them up, they're warm, just like an apport.
Yep.
And of course, the explanation is, well, Bigfoot was holding it in his hand, so it's warm. And it's like, but isn't this just the way this phenomenon works at this point? Like, it gives you that half and half thing. It's like, yeah, it makes sense as an ape in the woods, except we can't find it. But yet it mimics all this other stuff that we see in other encounters, like poltergeists.
Right. Yeah, and when like 14 rocks get thrown at you and they're all warm, I'm sorry, but he wasn't holding all those in his hand.
They have big hands, I hear. Not just big feet. Maybe they got some pockets, you know?
Yeah, they're marsupials. That's it.
But yeah, so I actually made a note about that Foo Fighter comment about the coins and stuff, because I thought that was an interesting observation you had there about that. Because yeah, I hadn't heard that part of it before for the Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
So again, it kind of leans toward the idea that this is, poltergeist-like in some way, shape, or form. I'm trying to see if I made any other notes here about you guys. Oh, it was interesting when he was so kind of a case against the extraterrestrial idea. So Marty had talked about a stealth fighter that they got that the UK had captured from Germany.
Oh, yes.
And he said they had no idea what it was.
Yeah.
Like they couldn't figure it out, and they had to turn it over to the Americans, who then figured out, what was going on. So when you say, okay, we captured this saucer and we back engineered it, we had trouble figuring out what another technologically similar Earth culture was doing.
Yes.
But we're going to back engineer a craft from a non-human, non-Earth culture that could be millennia ahead of us.
Right.
And make something out of that. That would be like going back and giving an iPhone to someone in, 100 BC. They might get a couple of minor things out of, but they're not going to figure out how to make the chips work and how to replicate it,
Yes.
No matter how much time you give them, they're not at that level where that's going to make sense.
Especially not if it relies on an entire network of other things like the iPhone does.
Yeah.
Right.
Like remote things that.
Yeah, the iPhone is just one piece of an enormously massive network of technology.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But even something bigger like a laptop. I mean, what's someone in 100 BC gonna make out of a laptop? And like that's.
No, I get your point.
Yeah, for
when
sure.
It's coming from a human culture, so an alien culture is not necessarily going to make things the same way we do.
Yep.
Yep, they may see an infrared and it just looks like a chunk of obsidian to us.
Right.
Exactly. So, the other thing that kind of triggered some of these thoughts was a book from Eric Wargo called Time Loops, and he talks about the way time works and the way things like precognition and stuff work. And again, precognition is something that has been shown again and again in laboratory tests on a small scale. So we can say there is science that supports the idea that precognition is a thing. Right here in Ithaca, Daryl Bem, I think it was, did the test that got the most coverage, and that's because the media found a way to spin it, which was by saying that porn proves psychic abilities.
Right. Yeah. Great
And
headline.
so he was even on the Colbert Report for it. So And basically what it was a test where they would show random images to people while they were hooked up to like an MRI or whatever to show brain activity. And they would find that the person would react to particularly sexual images prior to the image even being picked by the computer. And prior to really their knowledge of that was the next picture, but their brain would already be responding to it.
Yeah, and I think it was a big point was not only were they having some kind of pre-cognitive response, but the computer was designed to choose the image like fractions of an instant before it showed it. It had this gigantic database of images, and it runs an algorithm or whatever it is, some kind of pseudo-random number generator that helps it pick a random image out of this massive database. So the fact that the people were beginning to respond to the evocative image before the computer had even made a choice was what was really interesting about it.
Right. And it has been peer-reviewed and replicated.
Yeah.
So this is legitimate science. This is not, maybe because even he said, we need someone else to replicate this in case our equipment was off or something to that effect. But it's been replicated. I mean, peer review is, neither here nor there. There's a lot of problems with peer review, but
replication is key.
Different labs have replicated this and found the same thing.
But is this precognition, or are they actually having an effect on the random number generator?
Well, sure.
With their mind?
That's possible. I would say in this case it's precognition, because otherwise it's not like they're seeing more of the sexual images.
Yeah.
If you were seeing a higher number than they should randomly of the sexual images, then I'd say they're affecting the number generator. But these were also just regular people. These were not people who were psychics or anything like that, which suggests that all of us have this ability.
Yeah.
This is an inherent ability. And where Eric takes that in time loops is that everything that's happened is already going to happen. Like, we're in kind of a block universe. There's no free will. And sometimes we just get pieces of that information ahead of time.
Yeah. So you said this before, block universe. What does that mean?
It means that we don't have free will. Like, everything is set.
Okay.
But we're experiencing it linearly, like watching a movie. We don't know what's coming next, but, and we in our lives, we think we're making choices, but we've already made those choices. We've already, it's kind of like before life, we've already set everything out, and this is how everything went. And now we're just living through it.
Okay.
And the whole universe is like that. So that's a block universe. There's no option for change or for free will or anything like that. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if there's any way to ever find out if that's the case. Unless we learn how to make living restore points.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to save my life here, and I'm going to go back, and I'm going to see what happens if I chose the other thing.
Yes.
I mean, and it may also be that life works in a linear fashion, like certain video games do, where you do have some free will, but inevitably you're going to end up in the same place.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this when I was listening to your other presentations on this concept, and I was going to tell you about there's this ancient idea of fate versus destiny. And those they kind of sound like the same thing. But at least in a lot of ancient stories, myths, or however you would put them, oral traditions, they're treated as two different things. Fate is something that you can affect. What is your fate? And you at least in the way these stories are told, you can take your fate into your own hands.
Right.
Destiny is set by the gods or whatever it is whatever the old myth would tell you. And so there's tons of, I'm sure you can think of there's tons of stories where someone in the story is told what their destiny is, right? Yeah, and then they spend the rest of the story trying to make that not happen because they don't want it to take place. And that changes their fate to the point to where their destiny actually occurs, right? Everything they do actually makes the destiny take place.
Absolutely.
And so it gives you this idea of circularity, because then you start to wonder, well, if they had never been told that that's what their destiny was, would that have happened? Because they wouldn't have taken all these steps to stop it from happening, which is what actually causes it to take place.
Right.
So, and maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, because you've in your other explanations, you've got into this where you're starting to say like the stuff that happens at the end is actually the first thing.
Right. That things don't always happen in a linear way.
Right. Yeah. And so I see a lot of these stories about destiny and fate as being this kind of circular, paradoxical thing.
Yeah, it very well could be.
Yeah. And even in modern, in the Matrix, when Neo goes to meet the woman who is the black lady who is she's the Oracle.
Oh, yeah.
And she says, "Don't worry about the vase." And he's like, "What vase?" He turns and bam, knocks the vase over. And he's like, "Oh God, I'm sorry." And she's like, "I told you not to worry about it. Now what's really going to bake your noodle is, would it have happened if I hadn't have said anything?" That's the same. Right. That's the same kind of circular thing. Is she predicting the future, or does she cause it by giving him this prediction?
Right.
Okay.
So the other thing he demonstrates in time loops that's very interesting, particularly dealing with bigger disasters. And this also brings the emotional component in. So he suggests that when people have premonitions of disasters, they are not having a premonition of the actual disaster, but them finding out about it.
Yeah.
And one of the more convincing things he shows about this is there was a guy who, I forget what happened, like a volcano went off and it killed something like 10,000 people, or 100, maybe it killed 100,000 people or something like that. And the article that was initially posted said 10,000 people. And in his premonition, he had 10,000 people. And he had written it down, and he said, "This is going to happen. I'm not sure when, but this volcano is going to go off and it's going to kill 10,000 people." So he, and the first time he saw this, verification of this, he saw this newspaper article that said 10,000 people. And so he was like, "Oh, see, this is it." And so what he's suggesting in time loops is that what he's actually having a premonition of is his emotional reaction of seeing the article that says 10,000 people died or were injured or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And again, that suggests an emotional component, if not because of the disaster, because of the fulfillment of the prophecy.
Right. Because the real number was actually 100,000.
Right. But so he had the wrong number, but it was the number in the article.
Yeah. And that does tie in a little bit to, like, for example, the thing with remote viewing, where they found that when people are, after they've done the remote viewing on the unknown target, if they're shown the target later, that the remote viewing is always better, even though that's a weird retrocausal circular thing.
Yep. And there was something Robert Schoch had talked about too, and I think it was another Cornell experiment where kids who took tests and then studied afterwards would get better results as long as they didn't know what their results were till after they studied.
Yeah.
And that's like, well, that makes no sense whatsoever unless it don't always work in that past to present to future way that we think it does.
Yeah. I think we made a joke about this. Didn't we have a joke on the show about this, like study for your test afterwards? We were trying to tell people, try this out. Go take that test and then study afterwards and see if it works.
I just want to say that might have been Daryl Bem's research as well.
All right, we got to take a final break, and then we'll come back and finish this out. All right.
Fastest 2 hours in podcasting. already over.
That's right.
And now we are starting the third hour, which is kind of a common occurrence.
Become very common.
That's right. All right, Seriah, where are we going, buddy?
Well, first I want to say I want to try this. Whoa, hold on. I want to try this. I want to try to do a podcast and then do the research for it after.
Oh, yeah, I do that all the time. It works great.
I'll finish your book after I have you on the show.
Yeah.
We'll see how good the interview is before
Yeah.
before I put it up.
All right. So where are we going?
We're up to UFOs and poltergeist time loops. So when I was watching Hellier, there was a bit. I wasn't, people love Hellier, and I kind of get it, but it didn't do a lot for me. But there was one part that really stuck out to me. So they were doing, and I hadn't seen anyone do this before, but apparently it was more known in ghost hunting circles. They had one of those ghost box things that scans the radio stations, and it just flips back and forth. And you're supposed to try, spirits are supposedly able to talk through them by grabbing snippets of audio, I guess. I don't really know who came up with this or why anyone would think it worked, but some people claim they get really good results from it. And what they did is they took one of their researchers. They're sitting on the front porch of this house in the wilderness, and he puts on headphones to hear the box, and he puts on a face mask so he can't see. So he's basically in like a sensory deprivation thing, mostly listening to static. And, anytime a word comes across, he says it, and they're kind of relating it to things that are happening, but not like it was nothing that convinced me there was any connection other than, oh, that word is like one of the words was coyote. And they're like, well, we are in the woods. I'm like, unless a coyote walks up to the porch right after he says coyote, that's not,
Yeah, coyotes are desert creatures. They're not in the woods.
Oh, no, you get coyotes in the woods.
Oh, okay. All right.
We have all over here.
Oh, okay.
But the point is, like, unless there was no direct connection other than the fact that they're out in the wilderness and the word coyote came through. If the word coyote came through and then one ran through the yard, or one ran through the yard and then he said coyote, well, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
But he's sitting there and he's doing this, and when they take him out of it, he's like, wow, that was like really trancy. And he's like, at some point I saw this tin can. It was like this little tin can. He's describing it and everything. And he's like, I don't know. I've never had that happen before. It just like the image of this tin can was just so strong in my head. I have no idea why. So like the next day, they really have no trail to follow at this point in the show. And they just go out to some old cave that was like a train track at one point going through a tunnel. And they're really hyped up on this. And well, maybe we can find something here. And they're checking it out. And the guy trips over the can. And he starts freaking out. And he's going, this is the can I saw. This is the can I saw. And now naturally they interpret this as we're in the right spot. Like he saw the can and then we came here and here's the can. And I, after having read time loops, looked at that and went, what if the reason he saw the can is because he tripped over the can and got really excited?
Yeah.
And that, people have a problem with that. They're like, no. But why would he be excited if he hadn't seen it? It's like, because he did see, like, these things aren't happening in a vacuum. They're not happening in 1 + 1 + 1. They're happening all at once.
Yeah, I had the same problem when I was first trying to think through this. I'm like, well, that's just a paradox, right? You can't.
Right.
But that's if you want to view time as a linear thing, then yes, it's a paradox. But if time is something else, it may not be a paradox.
Paradox.
Yeah.
And who knows if things also can change? Like maybe the first time they, like in some reality, they went to the thing and he didn't get excited from the can, but somehow it still transferred back to him because he kicked the can. And then the next time he got it, and it just kept, in reality kept rewriting itself until it created this loop.
Oh yeah.
I mean, but that's, you know, obviously complete speculation. And apparently Eric Wargo also cited the same thing when he watched Hellier. Someone told me he did a talk and he pointed that out as a great example of a time loop.
So it's not really a time. Well, okay, so maybe it's a time loop in the sense that this is happening over and over until he's getting super excited and has a really powerful image of the can.
Well, it's a time loop in that it's not happening in a normal,
Linear.
typical way.
Okay, yeah, that the cause is in the future,
Right.
and the result is in the past. That's the loop.
Yes.
Okay.
So, I mean, that was just, you know, one of those things where I'm like, I mean, it may be just that, because the thing is, when they did that, they weren't really following a trail. That was the thing that bugged me about it. I'm like, and they walk onto these loose rocks and they're like making, you know, trying to get EVPs and stuff. And they walk off of these loose rocks and you hear like rocks. And they're like, did someone throw a rock? I'm like, you just walked on rubble. But I also understand that in the heat of the moment, you're not thinking that way.
Yeah.
You know, in the heat of the moment, you're like really incensed. You're trying to get something to happen. And then you hear a noise and you're like, oh my God, what was that? But, so but that is one of the other reasons why I feel like that's not, like, it doesn't make sense that it was leading them there, because there was nothing there. This really wasn't connected to what they were investigating. It's almost like they just needed to put something in the show. So they went to this spooky cave. But the time loop idea kind of does make sense because there's an emotional element, and he was in this trance state where he would have been able to pick up on it.
Yeah. He was in an altered state, at least in some way.
Exactly. I mean, because he has static going in his ears. His eyes are covered. And he said he felt really weird when he took that stuff off.
Yep. White noise can help you put yourself into an altered state. That's for sure.
Yep. So, I mean, that's sort of the time loop concept. So one of the things I applied all these disparate pieces to, and I don't know why my head put this together, but when you deal with, like, this is like the perfect storm sort of thing. Point Pleasant and the Mothman prophecies. So in Point Pleasant, you had environmental factors, because that whole area is sort of an area that's known for weird stuff, and it's sort of one of those portal type areas. Then you have John Keel, who's investigating what's going on. And John Keel is, in his books, says the people here tend to be very psychically sensitive. Some of them are aware of it and some of them are not. But he said, like, most of the people he talked to seem to have I don't know what he was judging this by, but he said they seem to be very psychically sensitive. So you might have a sort of genetic sort of thing going on where these people are more open to this stuff. And then you have a disaster, which was the collapse of the Silver Bridge on, like, what was it, 2 days before Christmas or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
So you have a small community that is potentially psychically sensitive anyway, and a disaster that is unthinkable. You know, all these people dying right before Christmas in this small community. How much worse can you get than that?
Yeah.
So what I started wondering is, was the bridge collapse the first thing that happened? Is the bridge collapse what said, like instead of, so some people had dreams of presence in the river and things like that, and they didn't know what it meant. But what if some of these people were picking up on this information in the past and it was causing them stress? Like, on some level, they, you know, that information, they knew the bridge was going to collapse, if they didn't know it consciously. So it creates this sort of unconscious poltergeist energy that's building up, and it's building up in the whole community because they're all picking it up. It affected everybody. It's a very tight-knit, small community. This could have been enough to create the UFO sightings, the Mothman, and maybe this stuff started picking up a form after enough people saw it, where it started to become more consistent. Because the Mothman, there's no reason to believe the Mothman could have been a real creature. You know, that's not something that could exist. It's not, you know, and it's all this stuff also stops at the bridge collapse.
Yeah.
So you have this spike of energy for like 3 years. You have people having poltergeist encounters, monster encounters, UFO encounters, all the stuff that's connected to this stuff. And then the bridge collapses and it all stops. So my thought is that maybe these things are, in this case, is something that happened in the future, sending energy backwards. And it's, when I say perfect storm, it's because of it's such a strong emotional thing in such a small community, in a portal area, in an area where people are already sensitive to this stuff, which is why you don't see this, like the Mothman prophecies kind of stand out. You know, that whole Point Pleasant thing kind of stands out in paranormal history like nothing else. And the same thing may happen with things like banshees. And there may be a genetic factor, and there may be a time loop factor where someone dies, someone the person cares about dies, and they're not translating that information coming back in time properly, you know, and so it's creating a poltergeist, which again, banshees are basically poltergeists. And they tend to run in families, which would again and say there might be a genetic component to this as well.
I wonder if people in Point Pleasant were psychic before all this stuff started to happen. I mean, there's no way to know, right?
And it's not like John Keel tested them. I think that was just his gut instinct that they seem to have more sensitive, you know, be more sensitive to this stuff.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm just wondering, I wonder if it is this time loop retrocausality thing that was causing whatever it was that Keel was detecting. In other words, they all had a heightened psychic thing because they were in the midst of this event that was about to take place.
Right. And one of the puzzles about the whole Point Pleasant incident is that there's so much different stuff going on.
Yes.
It's not like it was just the Mothman. There's all this stuff going on. It was like a hotbed for a few years of just absolute weirdness.
That's right. But okay, so going back to something you said, you've said this multiple times, and in the other presentations, you said it's the bridge collapse is the first thing that happened.
Right.
Now, do you mean that it was the causal event, or do you mean that in some? Okay, that's what I thought. Because like the way that the timeline goes, it was the last thing that happened, but if it was still somehow the cause. Retroactively,
because always work linearly. Future can affect the past, and past can affect the future.
Yes, right. So it's not the first thing that happened, but it was the causal agent.
Yes, thank you. Yes, should be cleared up. I just assume most people know it ended with the whole list of things ended with the bridge collapse.
Well, and maybe I'm playing with semantics here, but when you said it was the first thing that happened, I started to think maybe I don't fully understand what you mean by time loop.
Yes. It was the causal agent.
Okay.
The bridge collapse.
Okay.
People in the past were responding to something that hadn't happened yet.
Right.
And creating this, and it's entirely possible, especially with that much energy, that this stuff, that something could have just used it to start communicating with people.
Yeah. So the idea there would be that there was a massive retrocausal thing taking place, and that allowed something else to come in and start interacting. Is that what you're trying to say? Okay.
Yeah. So when you get all these entities, these men in black and stuff like that, and I think it was Zelia who pointed out that the men in black, they would always ask when in time they were.
Yeah. That's
you
right.
know, and they would always have cars that were just a little bit off the time period.
Yeah. That's right. Brand new, but not quite right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
As if they're working from outside our model of time.
Yes.
And that's another thing you get. Like, what was the quote that Keel had? I think it was Indrid Cold said, "I'll see you in time."
Yes.
So the whole time, these entities are basically talking about time regularly. Like it's almost like they're trying to show us that things aren't the way we think they are.
Yeah.
And I also, and also when you have this poltergeist stuff, like people are like, well, why is it, if it's us, why is it scary? Because I think this stuff is based on whatever type of energy it's pulling from. So if you're stressed out and putting out angry emotional energy, you're going to get an angry ghost. You know, the stuff I experienced was not an angry ghost. It just seemed like something wanted to listen to AC/DC. But it wasn't scary. It wasn't, and obviously wasn't trying to hurt me.
I mean, it didn't.
Other than my ears.
It didn't scare you, but that would probably freak some people out.
Oh, sure, it'll freak some people out.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is it didn't escalate to anything where it was like throwing stuff at me or anything, probably because I don't react with that fear response.
Right. I mean, I've listened to your show for years. I've heard you tell plenty of paranormal stories, and your reaction is always like, okay, that was weird, right? You're just... So if something has been trying to scare you for a while, it's totally failed, and it probably knows this at this point. Like, this is not going to work, but I'll try it anyway.
and you figure things like fear energy and stuff like that, anger, fear, those are easy and strong emotions.
Yeah.
So even if something is trying to get that and get us to generate that energy, it's going to do something scary. It's going to want to generate a fear response so it can get the energy it needs to manifest.
Yeah.
So the idea I get from this is like, I don't know if this is like probably stemming from Christian ideas, but the spirit world being timeless, or at least like above the dimension of time, therefore able to move throughout it freely. And so like emotions coming from the spirit are timeless in a way. So it's like you have this group of people in this town that are all closely knit together, and this event happens where all of their emotions are incredibly powerful. And it's like those emotions, they have a physical effect. Like we know that for sure. People's emotions have a physical effect on their bodies, on, that's the main way we know that these strange, whatever emotion is, it affects us physically. But maybe if it's exists outside of the boundaries of our linear experience of time, they're like, you have this really powerful emotional situation, and those emotions sort of spread out.
Yeah, they ripple effect
over time. So when you go back in time and you look at the situation, they are having a physical effect, but it's really strange. It's not a direct effect on the body of the person, or maybe that's how it ends up resulting in these weird poltergeist type things that seem disconnected.
Right.
It's some kind of physical manifestation, but it's not the normal direct link. But it has to dissipate in some way physically. So it's dissipating in these weird discombobulated physical ways prior to the event in the linear experience of time. And then once the event happens, it's like contained within all of the bodies of the people who are experiencing it at that point.
Right.
And so then the poltergeist activity stops.
Yeah, because now they're throwing.
Now the physical effects are actually happening and being channeled directly through their physical bodies.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
That's really weird.
And again, if you look at a block universe model, then it's not even that strange, because this has always been something that was going to happen. And it may be also that there are certain elements of our lives, like I said, we may live somewhat linear lives with that sort of free will. Like you were saying with the fate and destiny sort of idea.
Yeah, that we have some agency, but we all have a destiny, and it is unchangeable. Yeah.
It's like being on I always compare it to like being on a river. You're flowing down this river, and you can either go with the current, or you can kind of like fight it and try and stop and maybe, you know, pull off the river for a little bit, but you're always going to have to go back to the river.
Yeah. Yeah. Another way.
Like you're.
Yep. I also think of it as a very complex series of paths. You're going to start at one end and end at the other. And you're going to come out of the series of paths in this one place because they all converge eventually. But on the way, you can choose whichever path you want. You're just going to eventually end up at the other end.
I always like what was it? Doctor Who said something about there are certain points in time that are fixed.
Yeah.
And I look at an event like 9/11 and I think, well, maybe that's one of those fixed events.
Yeah, it's a pivot or a fulcrum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like one way or another, that's going to happen. So one way or another, that bridge was going to collapse and cause this trauma.
Yeah.
No, I mean, really, what all of this stuff, kind of the thing that I get from it all is like, I don't see a clear way that we're ever going to really figure out the way all of this stuff works. But learning about all these scenarios and all these different things that have happened to people makes me want to. It's like, man, I need to be more aware and try to pay more attention to gain my own experiences, right? Like, because I think if you shut out the possibility of there being a lot more to this reality than what we can see, you know, than our direct physical experience, then you're less likely to engage with it, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I don't know. It just makes me like, man, I need to pay more attention, grow longer tentacles.
And I think so much of this stuff is about pushing us forward. Like, okay, so not that stuff, but like when you're dealing with like near-death experiences, most people, not all, but most people who have near-death experiences find their lives changed for the better afterwards.
Yeah.
Right.
People, you know, like Whitley Strieber, when he started with his, you know, experiences, they were very negative, but over time, as he started, you know, dealing with them better, they became very positive, transformative experiences.
And there have been many, you know, people that are considered prophets or whatever, you know, in the past that obviously they used their abilities to kind of navigate their way around the strange aspect of our existence to the betterment of humanity.
Right.
So it's definitely not something to be taken lightly. And yeah, there's good and bad in any type of tool that you might use. Ways to turn things to good, you know, but you gotta, I don't know. It's like, makes me want to pay more attention.
And like I said, I think this stuff, you know, the reason sometimes this is frightening is because it's picking up on negative energy.
Well, there's negative energy out there. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's like the easiest thing to find.
Yeah. So whether or not it's intending to get negative energy or it's just drawn to it because it's the easiest type of energy.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, love is a very strong emotion too, but it doesn't come on as quickly or as violently as anger or something like that. And it's often channeled in a more healthy way.
Yeah.
Now what okay.
There's not a lot of books out there on how to make sure everything sucks, because that's easy.
I was going to point out the Lover's Lane sightings of UFOs and stuff like that.
And
so
monsters.
Yeah, so that's not love usually, you know, Lover's Lane or Lover's Parking area. That's usually lust, which is a powerful, very strong, energetic situation too. It's not necessarily negative, but it does cause occurrences, events, strange paranormal things.
Sexual energy is incredibly powerful. So if you're, I actually earlier in the show, I was thinking we should mention the Lover's Lane thing, because you get the monsters and the UFO things on Lover's Lanes where you're generating large amounts of energy from sexual tension, from sex, just sexual energy in general.
Yeah.
And these things, either these things are being projected by those people unconsciously, or something is going, ooh, look at this nice energy.
Yeah, look at that glowing pile of energy over there. Yeah, exactly.
And then we put a face on it.
Or it manifests somehow, or yeah, I mean, who knows what's going on? I still haven't fallen on one into the other of like, are we really creating this stuff, or is there something manifesting using?
It's like I mean, this is the idea of what you guys are calling energy, or what you're talking about with this energy is not a physical type of energy like vibrating atoms and stuff, but it
might be, but it's not something we can measure yet.
Yeah, not known in our physical universe thus far. But if you look at everything else, any other type of life in the universe, you got to get really close to an extremely powerful giant ball of energy.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like, where there is a lack of energy in the physical realm, there is usually a lack of life, or there's much less of it.
Right.
You have to get close to a star.
And we could also tie this into a whole conversation about things like orgone energy.
Yep.
Reich was able to measure orgone energy. That was not, it's like he was silenced because he was basically saying, look, this sexual energy is a real thing and it's powerful.
Yeah.
And the gatekeepers of the time were like, you cannot talk about sexual energy,
Yeah. Yeah. So are you saying we need to blame all this on the sun?
No, I'm just saying, hey, if you guys are talking about this sort of emotional energy, and if there are spiritual quote unquote life forms, they would be drawn to these highly energetic.
Okay.
It's hard to, because it's a non-physical, non-time bound thing. So it's hard to say, well, this place where there's energy, they go to it. They don't necessarily have to travel through space to get there. It's like whatever that realm is like, there's where there is that type of energy, there's going to be something to feed on it.
Yeah. Okay.
Or to thrive within it, just like there is in the physical realm.
Okay.
And look at Laird Scranton's stuff where he talks about a scrolling universe that goes from material to non-material.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
That stuff. That's freaking cool.
Yeah,
I love
and
that
I mean,
idea.
none of that does not contradict anything we've talked about.
Yeah, and it ties in with the yugas and us being closer to some other star, which gives us more solar, whatever it is that makes people better at being psychic. I mean, yeah, I see the correlations. That's why I'm saying we got to blame it all on the sun.
Okay, fine.
All right,
Yeah, we would not be having this conversation if it weren't for the sun.
Have you guys ever checked out the electric universe theory?
No.
Obviously, that because so many people mention it to you. I mean, it's one of those things. I think that when people look into it, a lot of times they get really taken with it. I know I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just so everyone knows out there, Seriah is a big electric universe guy.
That's right.
And I know these guys are well aware of the electric universe. It gets suggested so much to you guys.
That's right. Oh yeah, we get plenty of emails.
Great.
You guys got to look at the electric universe. We're like, we have.
It's one of those theories. Like, I wish the mainstream scientific establishment would take it a little more seriously.
Yep.
Because it is testable. It is, it has verifiable results. It's probably not completely right, because what is?
Yeah, right.
There's no such thing as anything that's completely right.
Yeah.
But more and more, they keep finding electrical components to all this stuff, and they just continue to not look at it. You know what I mean?
Yep. And I agree with what you've said about, we are electrical beings, and all of this stuff seems to be, I mean, even if you, on the one hand, we're possibly talking about some type of energy that that may be subtle, right? I think it's often referred to as subtle energy. But on the other hand, it may be a part of the electromagnetic spectrum that we don't know how to look at yet, or I don't know. I'm a big fan of science fiction. I've read a lot of my favorite science fiction authors are, some of the old greats like Heinlein and Niven and Arthur C. Clarke. And Heinlein wrote an excellent book about where the science fiction technology in the book was based on sort of, it was his take on a unified field theory and symmetry, and that symmetry demands that there be several other spectra of energy that we're just completely unaware of. Sure. And so in the book, they eventually find out how to, they accidentally find out how to, one of these spectra, it kills everybody nearby when they turn it on by accident. But some other people are able to sort of figure out what happened, and that leads to them finding the other 4 or 5 or 6, however many it was that need to be there for the energy patterns of the universe to be completely symmetrical. And that, and it was cool because, like, in typical Heinlein fashion, he used this to explain a whole bunch of stuff about ancient civilizations and how they moved giant stones and how they cured things and just all these myths and legends. He kind of explains it. He's like, yeah, that explains all this stuff because here's these other spectra that we just didn't know about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I laugh because that's probably exactly what would happen is we'd be like, oh, look at this. I think we discovered something. Oh, that was bad.
Yeah. Wow. That just killed everyone.
We didn't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. That's exactly how it worked in the book. They were like, okay, so can we work on it without turning it on this time?
Well, what is it? There's the plasma formations that we find in stone everywhere. There was a plasma physicist who said there are, something like 32 forms of plasma energy, and 28 of them are represented in ancient carvings.
Yeah, the petroglyphs you're talking about. Yeah.
And the 4 that aren't, no one would have survived seeing.
Right. They kill you.
Ah, man.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. That means something happened,
Yeah. Maybe some are carved partially because they died while carving it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Come on.
Oh, look at this one. And okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, and when we look at those giant stones, how did they move those giant stones? We don't have a really good, solid understanding of how that was done.
Right.
We have a lot of theories, but we can't replicate it.
That's right. And like some of the stuff in South America that's vitrified, that seems to have been exposed to extreme heat, like some of the stones from Sacsayhuaman down there, they've sourced the quarries. But when they test the stone from the quarries, it has microfossils in the limestone. But then when they test the limestone of the actual blocks themselves, the microfossils aren't evident.
Really?
And the stone seems to have been subjected to an extreme amount of heat, and in some cases there's vitrification, and no one really has a good answer for it. So yeah, there's all kinds of. I mean, I don't know. I really like the. We're kind of way off subject now, but I do think
pyramids.
I really like the idea that there were maybe several much more ancient cultures. Jesus Gamara talks about this, that the Hanan Pacha and Uran Pacha, that the 3 different constructions types down there in South America. The first one was basically they were carving directly out of what Graham Hancock calls the living rock. It was rock cut. They weren't cutting blocks. They were just carving existing stone into shapes. Those are the oldest ones. And then the next ones are the massive megalithic polygonal dry laid, the ones that look like they were molded.
Yeah.
And then there's the latest one was the Inca trying to copy some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just, if what we've been talking about this whole show implies that there are other spectra or other energy types or other things taking place in the universe, or like you've said in some of your other presentations, that we don't really have a full grasp on the fundamental nature of all of reality. We see a piece of it, but we don't really have a grasp on all of it. There's parts of it that are still outside of our understanding. And we've talked about the electromagnetic spectrum, but the reason we've discovered all of these pieces of the electromagnetic spectrum that we aren't able to experience directly is because we can experience directly a piece of it. So we start out knowing that the spectrum is there, and then that it's just a matter of, working on it to figure out, oh, there's all these lower wavelengths and all these higher ones that we can't see, and then we can build instruments to see them. But how do you start looking at a spectra or a type of energy that you yourself have no senses for? How would you even begin to build a tool to see it?
Well, but even the energies we do have senses for, like Kundalini energy, which, people who are practitioners of Kundalini yoga, especially advanced practitioners, can raise and lower at will. I mean, they've done tests where they've been able to, I forget what they used, but they had a monk go into a meditative state, and they can actually pick up the chakras.
Yeah, and they're picking it up with instruments that are looking at electromagnetic spectra, right? That's basically
right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're that's another part of the nature of the universe, is that all of these things interact with each other, even if it's in very subtle ways. So whatever that monk is doing with some other completely other type of energy is also causing waves in the electromagnetic spectrum that we can pick up. But is that the source, or is that a secondary cause?
Yeah. And I can definitely attest to the fact that Kundalini is very electrical.
Yeah.
And when you look at most of these paranormal encounters, again, you're seeing a lot of descriptions of electrical energy.
That's right. Yep.
So that is definitely a key component to all this stuff.
Yep. And I love how the universe or nature is just analogous to itself and to the greater picture, where you see the Fibonacci spiral in these tiny little shells and stuff, and then you find out, oh wow, the whole universe is like that.
Yeah,
and,
galaxies are doing the same thing. Yeah.
It's stuff like that. You see the waves on water. And how long were people seeing that before they realized that the sounds they were hearing and the stuff that they were seeing was also just like that in a way? These waves traveling out and all, it's like, it's always showing us a little piece of the picture and saying, hey, there's a bigger picture that's just like this. Just like we have sight, which is one tiny little fraction of the entirety of the electromagnetic spectrum, is kind of telling us like, hey, you're only experiencing one tiny little piece of the total of reality. It's totally true.
Well, it's because we're living in a computer simulation.
No, come on, guy.
And they just said, we'll just use this algorithm for everything.
But what I was going to say is, you pointing that out suggests that the same thing may be happening with time. Look, you're experiencing this little piece of it, the part right now that you see as the present. But actually,
all of this time is
always extant, and you can experience parts of things that aren't in the present.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
there's a bigger picture.
It's likely that our higher consciousness experiences all of this at once, but for whatever reason, we've chosen to experience it in this linear fashion here.
Yeah. Yeah, because, if you were a consciousness, a being that existed in a place where it was like an eternal instant, that time either didn't exist or you were in all of it at the same time, then stuff would be kind of boring, because you can't really make any choices, right? Everything is already happening or has happened or is, you know what I'm saying? That the words break down. So maybe you would want to take a ride in a place where you can do stuff. And, where you, for a little while at least, you don't know what's about to happen.
You can go play a video game.
That's right. Yeah.
The video game analogy does actually work really well with that type of stuff.
Yep.
Because you can be outside the game and have knowledge that the avatar in the game does not have.
Yeah, that's right.
But yet you can respond to that knowledge because you're being controlled by a higher force.
That's right. There's and that's what all the synchronicities and little clues and hints and things are.
Yeah.
They may be the method for the higher self trying to control this linear being. No,
well,
go that way.
Maybe well, that's it. Maybe the higher self doesn't have direct control over us.
Yeah.
It can only hint at stuff. So it tries to show us things in dreams. It tries to push us in certain directions with synchronicities. And sometimes we listen and sometimes we don't.
If it jumped in there and made you do something, you'd come out of the dream.
Yeah,
You'd
maybe.
wake up.
Or, you get home and go, I don't remember driving home.
Must have been my higher self.
My higher self realized I was dozing off and took over for a little bit.
That's right. All right, Seriah, this has been a fantastic show. Why don't you tell everybody about your podcast and where people can find you?
My podcast deals with all of this stuff and much, much more. Everything from lost civilizations, although that was a big focus early on, and then I sort of lost that for a bit. Paranormal, UFOs, consciousness, people's stories, weird history, lost history. So, yeah, all that stuff. Wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's wheredidtheroadgo.com is everything. So everything is linked there. The YouTube, we're on all the popular podcatchers and all that stuff. And there's merch, and there's the entire archive of shows, and there's a Patreon for extra content, and I think that's everything.
Yeah, and what show number? Do you number your shows? Do you know how many you've published?
My shows, because my shows. So mine started as a radio show. It's still on the radio, and so they're just dated.
So what would you estimate? 400?
Well, I've done at least one show a week since January 26, 2013. I've never missed a week. Most weeks have at least one, maybe two, occasionally 3 shows.
That doesn't tell me a number. I can't do the watcher math. Where's the watcher?
I can't do that math either. But let's simplify.
Lots of content.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of content, and some videos up on the YouTube as well as actual shows. But let's see, that the clock is not going to give me a calculator. Okay. So 2013
times 2013 to now, let's see, that's 7 years times 52, one a week.
Well, we'll say 8 years, one a week. Is about 416, so probably in the 500 range.
Okay, I was thinking 400 or 500. All right, that wasn't too bad. That's excellent. Yeah, so wheredidtheroadgo.com. People check it out. Seriah always has great content and lots of guests with lots of interesting content. So,
including you guys.
Yeah, sometimes even us. If you can't get enough of the Snake Bros here at Snake Bros, you can always go to Where Did the Road Go and find us there.
And if you're into metal, you can check out my music show at thelastexit.org.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's proof
with no AC/DC.
Yeah, there will not be any AC/DC. It's underground dark music, whether it be metal, punk, hardcore, industrial noise, some comedy music, but it's not anything you're going to hear on the bigger stations.
All right, there you go. Dark metal. Seriah. All right, people, check him out. Thanks so much for coming on, Seriah.
Thank you, buddy.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
And as for our stuff, you guys all know, brothersoftheserpent.com. You can find everything there.
We love you.
We always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work.